Hi, I'm John Papola, and you're listening to the Emergent Order podcast. One of my favorite things is when someone can really cross disciplines and bring a sense of sort of fusion together in the work they do and the way they approach the world. And no one that I know personifies this more than William Hurley or Whurley. Whurley is a serial entrepreneur. He's one of the most creative people I know. One of the best things about Will is he brings a childlike enthusiasm and energy to everything he does, and I think it's part of what's made his startups and his companies so successful. And so it's really exciting to have a conversation and share it with you, with my good friend, Will Hurley. So, Will Hurley. First question. Whurley. Where does Whurley come from?
Oh, so that's like the rest of the 2 hours. What a great question. So I went to work at Apple in the early 90s, and there were these two guys who are really, really good friends of mine now, years later, almost 30 years later, because I'm just rounding up, in like 2 or 3 years, it'll be 30 years I've known these guys. Mike Irwin, who's the current partner of mine at the fund that we just launched, and Sebastian Hassinger, who's worked with me at a variety of things and will inevitably work with me again, who were the cool guys on kind of the Unix floor at Apple. And Sebastian...
Cool guys on the Unix floor.
Yeah, Sebastian gave me that name. And it was derogatory. It was not a compliment. It was like Whurley, like, whew, crazy guy, right? And...
like Tilt-a-Whirly.
Yeah. Sebastian would love to be in on this interview. I'm sure he could come with even worse things. But so I didn't really necessarily love it for a long time. And then in 2006, a venture capital firm was looking for a CTO at a tech company in Tel Aviv. And I didn't understand that this is how the Valley can work sometimes, but two really famous people, Brian Behlendorf from the Apache Foundation, and Tom Bishop, who had been the CTO of Tivoli and BMC and really well-known, engineer, had both recommended me. So I was going to get the job, right? Because these two great people, the VC reached out and they were like, we need somebody who knows systems and knows open source. And these two famous people said that this guy was great, so he's the guy. And one of the conditions was that I call myself Whurley because it had kind of caught on in open source and other stuff.
We will hire you, but you have to go by a nickname.
Well, it wasn't a have to. It wasn't a have to, but the way the story goes is real simply, I was flipping through the agreement because I was like, wow, I thought I was here to interview, not just like sign up like I had a job. And I was flipping through the pages, as working my way back to like what the offer looks like. And, they're like, oh, and it'd be great, and your cards can just say Whurley, and I'm flipping through and I get the back page. And, what I was explaining was, well, so this is kind of something that's derogatory. I've never really used it. I don't really have a personal brand or whatever. And I get to the last page and I saw the numbers and I was like, but I've been thinking about having a personal brand for quite some time now. And this might be the moment in time to launch that. So signed, right?
I really don't like this name. Here's the number. But I've really been warming up to it.
I mean, that's honesty. That is exactly what happened.
On second thought.
Yeah, it literally was like, but if it makes that big a difference to you, it is not that important to me. I have no ego involved in this whatsoever. You could call me Bob for this number. And then it kind of used... I like to call it an accidental personal brand because I've never put any effort into it. I built my first website about 3 years ago after Goldman Sachs bought Honest Dollar because I didn't have one and it became evident that I needed something with some material on it. Before that, I've done a horrible job of giving it any time or attention as far as utilizing it in my career. But a variety of things happened. It got used more and more. And then in 2016, I got the opportunity to host President Obama at South by Southwest, which was on Friday. And we announced the sale of this company to Goldman Sachs on Monday. And we didn't tell the president about Goldman Sachs, and we didn't tell Goldman Sachs about the president. And we were just like, we'll just kind of ride the crest of this wave through South by, and then at the end of it be like, greatest South by ever.
Well, it's in a long line of behind closed doors Goldman Sachs relationships for politicians. It's totally that's actually the standard operating procedure of interactions with Goldman Sachs and sitting presidents or soon to be or former.
I came to you when this was an opportunity. I said, hey man, I need some advice, right? And you recommended a bunch of books, a bunch of stuff I read, and what I learned was they used to be the first call the president would make, like, we're in economic trouble, like, quick, call Goldman Sachs, right?
Yeah, like the J.P. Morgan of 1907 is now Lloyd Blankfein.
And then now something happened, and then all of a sudden, and there's people there that are really upset about it, right? I mean, they'll cry about it, right? Because it's, a few assholes took 140 plus years of, whatever. And I wouldn't say like all, I'm not by any means saying like bankers are saints, but like
they're just people like everybody else.
But they're just people, and there's good people and there's bad people. But the thing is like I didn't know, so I was doing this research. But the point is back to the question you asked about the Whurley thing is like President Obama got up on stage and unbeknownst to anyone, and I'd briefly talked to him. I was going to talk to him more later because we were trying to rush everything, and we got this built. We were at the Austin Music Hall, which was going to be torn down. So it's like we got to do this event fast. Like I literally think it's getting torn down tonight. And so we're rushing everything through, and President Obama says, I want to thank Whurley, and.
You send me the clip, I think, later that night.
And then, Lloyd Doggett and everybody that was in Democratic politics was like, well, yes, of course I know Whurley. I mean, Whurley and I go way back. Whurley, and people, the Mayor Adler saw me at the next event. And I'm pretty darn sure he used to always say, hey, Will, what's going on? And he was like, Whurley, blah, blah, blah. And it just like, then it's like, well, once Obama said it, then like everybody says it, right?
No, you're Whurley forever now. That's it.
And the thing is
I always trip over it because my inclination is just to say Will,
which is fine, right? Like
but I go back and forth kind of naturally because there's something slightly cheesy about using like the Twitter shorthand tag version.
I don't care. I mean, originally what happened was Sebastian and Mike and all the cool Unix guys. I'm going to continue to say that. I'm going to own that one. They used to have cool names like Draconis and Singe and all these things. And so it was kind of an insult because they put it in as like W. Hurley, right? Like Whurley, it's my first initial last name. But once you put things into the system at Apple, they're there forever, right? Like you can't.
Yeah, they're written in code and then written in stone, literally immediately after the account is made.
It wasn't changing. and so it was super interesting. And then and other things happened during that same time. Like before that happened, a couple of years before, Amex sent me an Amex card and it said Whurley. And I was like, well, that's...
And it was just because they just did the short name, like just did the letter and then or did you actually?
No, it was like I had been at CES and I had spoken at a thing and an Amex person saw me, and then I went by like the Amex Lounge and all, and they're like, oh, it'd be cool. Like you should do this with your card and all this. And then they did this for me, and it was like, I mean, I didn't like ask for it. They kind of did it, and it was like, well, that's kind of cool.
You packed a lot of pretty amazing stuff into that explanation, but it all starts with the fact that you got into this tech universe having never even gone to college. Never.
Well, let's clear this up. There were two ridiculously amazing women I was attracted to when I was a young man out of high school that were in the lab band, jazz band at Temple Junior College. It's now Temple College. And I did take an electronic music course as a way to be able to get into lab band, jazz band, as a way to be like, look, I could be a cool musician too. And I was super into the music, and I played music. So, I mean, in theory, like if I was running for president and it was like, he said never went to college, people were like, he took 2 elective courses at college, the liar. Like,
one Pinocchio.
You're right. I did.
For electric keyboard electives.
Right. I did do that. Which, so, whenever I'm with somebody who's, I have 2 PhDs from MIT in quantum physics, what'd you do? I was like, well, I have taken electronic music class before, and if Holiday Inn would pay me, I'd be like, I stayed at a Holiday Inn.
There's
Express.
more than 2 notes, so it's kind of like quantum computing.
Right. But this, what it comes down to is I was playing music, and having a lot of fun. I wasn't really doing anything with my life, but I wasn't wasting my life either, right? There's this this thing people do where it's like, because somebody isn't being productive in the way they think they should be productive, right? Or they're not just economically productive. There's not a way to judge them through some societal lens. It's like, well, they're wasting their life, right? It's like, my life back then, I look back and I go, there were some amazing days, right? Like, it was great. And unfortunately, it was, waylaid by a tragic accident where I was riding with a friend of mine and a couple of girls in a car midday, and it was lightly raining, and he was driving a little too fast, and we got in a bad accident. I was the only person injured, and I had a fence post come and hit me, in my lower right side, belly area, and run all the way up to my left, shoulder, and crush most of my internal organs. And I was dead on the scene, and then I came to, and then the ambulance came, and then I went to Scott and White Hospital in Temple. And while I was at Scott and White, they did all these tests, and I had this huge bruise that went across like a driver's side seatbelt, but I was a passenger. I kept saying something's not right, and they said, you're delirious, you've been in this accident, you're really shaken up. That's from the seatbelt. And they sent me home, and my dad drove by the HEB and went inside and told everybody that knew me there, stories for 30 minutes while I was sitting in the car to get Sprite and stuff like that, because parents for Gen Xers solve everything with Sprite. Right? It's like, oh, you're sick. It's some Sprite. Like,
No, I think or ginger ale. Now, remember,
I have no idea why Sprite or ginger ale is a cure-all.
You get ginger ale and stir the bubbles out of it. It is a tonic that cures cancer.
Yeah, it does everything, apparently. I've still not understood that. I don't even like Sprite. But and then we went home, and I was laying in bed dying, right? I had been bleeding internally at this point for hours. I mean, I should be dead by all accounts. It happened on Friday the 13th, 1991. And my brother had come home, and he had joined the Army, to follow my dad's footsteps, and he was a medic. And he looked at me, and I looked like a battlefield injury, right? And he freaked out. My dad said, yep, we're taking you right back to the hospital. Got up. I'm walking by the bathroom, and I said, just a minute, I don't feel so well. I just threw up a couple liters of blood.
Oh,
my dad races across town to the hospital. I walk in, I see the doctor. I say, I told you something's wrong. And then I'm just blacked out. He looks white as a ghost. It's literally like a movie scene. I see the lights going above me, and there's this anesthesiologist, and this doctor says, you're older than 18. You have to sign this, or we can't operate on you, and you're going to die, right? Which brings in a whole bunch of questions about the medical, right? It's like, you're in no condition to sign this, but if you don't sign it, then, we're not going to be able to do anything.
Yeah,
right?
that's a strange moment.
That's a really, looking back on it, and when you think about the debates we have over the medical system stuff, there's a lot of stuff that's fucked up in that, right? But I went through 13 hours of exploratory surgery and spent a couple weeks in the ICU, and then I moved in with my grandmother, and I took the insurance money and I built a digital recording studio out of ADATs, right? Do you ever come across these? They used VHS tapes to record 8 tracks of digital audio.
Oh,
remember
yes,
these things?
I remember these.
And so I had the first 48-track ADAT studio anywhere in the South. And so
you're like, I can't walk, but...
And I had a Mac, and I had Macromine Director, and I could do stuff for CDs and stuff. And so these people were like able to... they'd go to Alesis or whoever, and they'd be like, hey, we want to really work with some of this. And be like, I had it. So I was able to rent it and rent it virtually and do stuff. And I was making a little money, right? That was kind of my first business. And I wouldn't say it's a business. I wasn't really running it like a business. I wasn't really, it was more doing cool music stuff.
Yeah.
And then a guy named Graham Jones and I started messing around. We found out that the MIDI SMPTE timing was off on everything in Director always. So you're building a CD for IBM.
So what does that mean?
So you're, and I don't want to name any shops. I almost named 2 just then, self-editing. But say you're one of these big shops in Austin. We're living an hour north in Temple, and you're doing a CD for IBM. $300,000, $500,000 you're charging them to this CD for the trade show. Remember those stupid CDs that used to look like business cards, and they'd custom cut them and all that?
Right.
You're making these things, charging all this crazy money for them. And you'd get the golden master, and then you'd play it, and the music wouldn't be synced with the video, or the things wouldn't line up because it was using this MIDI SMPTE timing channel, and it was off. And we found that we could write in the scripting language called Lingo these X objects. We could embed these X objects. So you send us your project, we do some magic, and we charge $5,000 an hour. And in a couple hours, problem solved, right? So $10,000 on a $300,000 project was absolutely highway robbery. I mean, there's no doubt. We were pirates. Grant was buying weed and guitars and synthesizers, and I was buying new basses and rum, and we were just like, this is great. And we wouldn't get a lot of people like, well, that couldn't have been a business. It's like, yeah, you'd see one every like 2 months. One summer we got like 3 or 4. It's like, but you're like 22 years old, and you just made $40,000 in the summer, and the rest of the year is writing your cool songs for your band that is for sure going to make it. Right.
And now what year is this now that you're doing this?
Like 90, 92, 93.
So, I mean, this is pre-internet time, really. I mean, the internet exists, but it's
so
not a thing that it's like you're on Usenet groups, if anything.
Yeah.
Dial-up modem.
People are still using AOL.
56K baud modems.
People are still using AOL, right? Yeah. There's not all these things kids don't know about, right? And then Apple, Graham said, oh, man, we should work at Apple. They're hiring in Austin.
Now, who's the CEO of Apple in 92? Is it Gil Amelio?
Yes. I'm
So
pretty
Apple's
sure
not in a great spot.
Scully's not there. I get that timeline mixed up all the time. Gil Amelio's there. Apple's not in a great spot, but they're still Apple.
Right.
And you're like two nerd geeks that do music.
And did Apple had a presence in Texas at that time?
Huge presence. This is the thing that upsets me about the recent news about Apple's investing $1 billion campus. People are like, will it change Austin? It's like, yeah, you do know that the second largest campus for Apple has been here since the 90s, right? Like they're going to add 5,000 people to like 20,000 already or something. It's like, it's really not that big a change. They're just finally investing money into actually building something worth a shit instead of renting a bunch of different buildings.
Right.
So, I mean, I found all those articles laughable, right? It's like, okay, that just shows how little any tech reporter or any reporter in Austin knows about it. In the 89 earthquake happened, Apple lost inside sales and support. And that cost the stock severely. It's part of what helped drive them down. And so they moved it to Austin because it's a disaster-free area. So all inside sales and support and accounting, that stuff was all done here. That way, if there was another earthquake, all of that stuff just kept humming along.
The
right?
revenue stuff, selling.
Exactly.
It's like we can fix some of this other stuff that goes offline, but if we don't sell the products, we run out of job. We run out of the ability to pay people real fast.
Yeah, and so they had this opportunity to apply for jobs, and we heard through a friend of a friend, and we met this guy, Ben Clark, and he interviewed us, and he's like, well, you guys are pretty talented, and we could use multimedia talent, but what we're really hiring for is people to be on the phones and help people support stuff, and that and then I'm like, he's like, but we have this group. It's a new group. It's going to support movie studios. We want to get product placement, and when they call for support, they're going to go through like a special support line. And then when you're not doing that, you take peripherals calls. So you support like the LaserWriter 800. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
They used to have the toner fuse so hot it would catch on fire. And people would wait on the support line, and you pick up the phone. They'd be like, you'd hear somebody back, oh my God, it's on fire. And they'd be like, yes, we have a printer. And you'd be like, hang up and call 911. Click, right? And then you'd like notify a lawyer immediately. Be like, we got another one, right? or the infamous 14-inch color monitor where the fuse in it was not the right fuse. So you'd get your new monitor out, you'd plug it in, and you turn it on, and it'd go poof, and the fuse would blow, but the green light on the front was still on. There's just no picture. And you'd be like, it's broke. And you'd call, and we'd say, well, that's weird. I don't think I've ever seen this before. Can you go through these unnecessary steps for me? Okay, you know what? we are such a great company. I love you so much. I'm going to ship you a brand new one. What I want you to do is just put that one in the box it came in. The UPS guy is going to wait at your door. He's just going to take that piece of junk away. I don't know what happened. That's weird. You do like 50 of those a day.
Apple's quality control has improved, I think, since then.
There was a different time, a different company. But we got this job doing this stuff, and we loved it. And we were making $14 an hour with amazing benefits. Apple has always been an incredible company to work for. And, that's what kind of kickstarted my career in tech, because what happened was I ended up in this situation where they were like, hey, we're hiring for the second floor where all the cool Unix guys were. And I was like, well, those guys don't seem to do much work. They make way more money, and they have all the cool stuff, right? Like they had the AUX boxes and like all kind of amazing stuff that you had to build a pitch. You had to go through. So there was a couple jobs. I applied for one, and Sebastian got it because he was in peripherals, and it was in what was called the Direct Response Center. And Sebastian was a super Unix god and Perl master and all this stuff. And he basically, I went in an interview and I was like, I really love working at Apple and I'd love to do stuff. And Sebastian was like, yeah, I just like hacked in the system and all this is wrong and I've already fixed all the stuff you're hiring somebody for, so you should just hire me anyway and I'll just not work and just pay me for the work I've already done or whatever. And they were like, wow, this guy's amazing. I mean, I don't even think they were just like, and Sebastian got the job. And I was just like, oh, I hate him. But he was arguably extremely better than probably.
And at that time, had you, aside from your video audio sync hack thing, had you been like a tinkerer with software and scripting and things?
I tinkered a little here and there. I took a computer class in 6th grade at Lamar Middle School, and Professor Scott, God bless his soul, because I'm not trying to slam the guy, because I went back to tell him years later what my career was, and he was dead, unfortunately. And that's probably better because I don't think that I was going back for the right reasons. But he had a parent-teacher council with my parents, and he said, in the future, even a cash register at McDonald's will be a computer.
Oh, he was...
Pause for dramatic effect.
He was spot on.
Your son will not be able to get a job at McDonald's because all I did was fuck around with these things, and I wasn't doing the lessons the way they're supposed to be done. I've
been watching your son at school, and I've concluded he's unemployable.
Yeah.
So take out some more insurance policies now.
Pretty much. So I had done that, and then my dad, who's amazing, he's really big into guns and stuff. He wanted to foster this, even though Dr. Scott didn't, and he had at times like. We lived in kind of a very military-friendly area, and there was a lot of military people. Somebody'd have like a Commodore 64 or something. He'd like trade him a gun. He'd be like, well, I'll trade you this gun for it or whatever. And he'd be like, well, here's a computer. You can do more of that, whatever you're not doing with it. But I hadn't done anything of any importance. Not until I met Graham, and really, so Graham had an Apple IIe, and he was really into it. And he was really he was really proficient at it, and then I was like, oh, there's so much more I could do. I'm kind of wasting this, right? But getting to Apple, there was this job in training available, and I was like, well, that's on the 2nd floor, and that's pretty cool too. And I went and I was applying for it, and they said, okay, you're one of the final candidates. So now what we want you guys to do is build a training program. Like, we want you to pick a product and build a training around it, and then you're going to deliver that training to the actual trainers, and we're going to rate you on it, and then that's who's going to get the job. It's whoever does the best project. And in doing the training program, I had went up to the 2nd floor, and I'd seen this book of CDs, and I went to get it to go through all the products. I was going to find an obscure product, and I was looking at this book of CDs. There's 48 CDs maybe in here. It was called the Support Tools and Information Library. And it was what they sent to the Mac dealers, because way back when, for all the youngsters listening, there used to be no Apple stores, and Apple had like CTW and all these like weird
Micro Center,
and everybody sold these Macs. It was what they sent to them, and that was when you took your computer and they would put that CD in. It would tell them step by step how they could fix whatever's wrong with the computer. It was all done locally. And so I was like looking at these CDs, and I was like, wait a second, how much do they send these out? It's like, well, they send a new one out every quarter. So they're updating these deals. And they don't send all the CDs out, but this, there's 10 updates, right? So you've got a new printer, and you got a this, and you got a that. And I thought, oh, I've got the best idea. So everybody went in and they pitched their product. And I went in, I said, I don't have a product to educate you on. I found a problem. I pulled the Sebastian. I was like, I found a problem, something you guys are idiots, and I'm a genius, and I fixed it. I basically just copied what he did with his because it seemed to work so well. And I was like, you see this binder of CDs? And I just like, boom, slammed it down. I was like, I've replaced them all with this one CD through the magic of this thing called the internet. So I wrote an X object in Macromind Director that would download from an FTP server all the content from the CDs and then present it so that all that was on the CD was a cool interface and then an index of it would literally read a file off the internet that was an index to where all the content was and then present it in a menu. This package maybe ends up being like 100 CDs a year that you're sending out to all these places. You just send them one CD and that's it, right? So the shipping cost, the burning cost, the mastering, the keeping up. And so, it was like, boom, I got the job. And I also got made head of what was called Apple's Worldwide Internet Training Program. and I had this amazing Carolyn Schaefer, my first real boss at Apple. And I was like, I don't really know what that means. And she said, well, I think that's your first job, is you're kind of making this area. So get to figuring that out.
Well, and it's funny because when I think about, so you're a little older than me, but I was going, we both kind of grew up right at this transition point.
Oh yeah. Remember Netscape and Mozilla and the little dragon is there, and you're like, there's an image in it now. Yeah.
Well, and I remember there was a time when, younger people under 40 might not remember this or even be aware of this, when Microsoft thoroughly believed that the future of computing was CD-ROM. Mm-hmm. That was what it was going to be. And I think they had bought like an encyclopedia company.
Yes.
And they were, and Bill Gates got dinged for essentially, quote, missing the internet, because they were like, no, it's so fast to ship all these bits in a truck on plastic. Yeah. This internet thing is slow compared to shipping bits in a truck on plastic discs.
It was.
And it was true, but it was just like the extent to which that live interconnectedness wasn't even getting caught by everybody.
So if you look at my entrepreneurial career, it has been based on learning from that one lesson at Apple, right? Like I'm really like a one-trick pony.
That really was the prototype.
It's just a really good trick, right? Which is like, think of what I'm doing now with quantum computing. Right now people are like, yeah, but there's only like 20 bits there. I mean, it's the same thing as him saying shipping bits on a truck is so fast because this thing's so slow. People are like, yeah, there's 20 bits and like my phone has 3 billion in it, and it's like, yeah, for now. And then there's a paradigm shift and everything changes.
So before we move on to the next step, I want to linger on something. You did not grow up with means.
Correct.
Tell me a little bit about, because we're going to get into all of your incredible, we've already gotten a preview of how far you've come. And I think, especially in 2019, where Howard Schultz is being railed against as a billionaire, even though he grew up in the projects. Give me your up from the.
I mean, fuck that guy, right?
But what was life like for you growing up? I mean, when you first got started, your dad's in the military.
Yeah, grew up on military bases. I mean, look, it's a real simple story. A lot of military families are poor, right? They get some free housing and they get some stuff, and these people go out and they do this incredible job that is underappreciated because it's always the one bad story, or it's something about like, well, we don't like war. And it's like, well, for a lot of these people, there's not a lot of career choice. For some of them, they just a love for defending their country. It's just the way they were raised, right? There's all of these things are different. It's like, it's that whole thing about like, before we're too critical of politicians or people in the military or people who do film or people who are liberal or whatever. So maybe go spend like a month living
In
their
their shoes.
life in their shoes or whatever, and then come back at it, because it's so easy, especially in today with all the social media and everything, to just be like, I saw a tweet that was bad about so and so, retweet,
He's
click,
Hitler.
right, exactly, and it's
Therefore,
like,
Hitler.
right, it's like just everybody calm the fuck down. But my dad went to work when he got out of the military. He was in for 21 years. He was a Green Beret. He's in the 101st Airborne. He's a Ranger, and there's not a lot of career options for somebody like that when you come out, right? He has 2 marketable skills, right? Killing someone or killing lots of someone, right? Like, I mean, it's
really 1.5 skills.
It's
if
not
we
like
think
in
about
the
it.
Air Force, there's people and they make it to a certain rank or whatever, and it's like, oh, and they went to West Point and they did this thing, and there's all this strategy. It's like, and that's not saying that great people don't come out of the Army. It's just like in that enlisted life, and that kind of what he was a first sergeant, was the highest rank that he made, and that was where he was happy, right? There's not a lot of options, and so getting out there were not a lot of great options, and he got a job in the restaurant business, and some people came in and tried to rob the restaurant, and he took care of it. The restaurant fired him. They're like, we have insurance. We don't do that. We you give them the money and they leave, right? And he doesn't comprehend. There's a very binary right and wrong with my dad, right? And when it's wrong, well, you just take care of it, right? So he ran for county commissioner. Unfortunately, was not successful in that. I mean, he definitely tried a whole bunch of stuff, but also, we were living in this house that my grandfather had built, these 2 houses, and gave one to my mom and one to my aunt. And if it weren't for that, I don't know where we'd have been, but it was just, there weren't a lot of options. And this is where, people are like, oh, there's no middle class today. There wasn't a middle class back then. There really wasn't. I mean, there was like, there was what they used to call upper middle class. It's like, well, that was not really the only middle class. And then it was like, there were, you were poor, right? And my mom worked at a jewelry store, and she worked at a nursing place, which is hourly jobs, and they did what they did to do everything they could for us, and we turned out, okay, I guess. But the main thing is my dad really taught me a lot about working and hard work, right? And the American dream. And it's like, I always hear people complain about all manner of things. And I hate hearing it. It's just, I have a visceral reaction to it, because it's like, well, wait a second. Okay, so I'm white, so I got the white privilege thing or whatever. Sure, I've got a whole bunch of stuff. I mean, got beat up in 6th grade because I went to primarily black and Hispanic school. I was the only white guy, right? And I got beat up in a PE class and went home crying, and of course my dad has no sympathy. He's like, well, when somebody does that, you take the leader, right? You take them out. Then nobody messes with you or whatever, right? So it was like,
let me teach you.
It was
military
great.
/ prison.
It was
rules.
great. Yeah, it was great support.
It's like, school is like a prison, so I'm going to start you right.
Pretty much. But the thing is like, so let's say that I have some advantage because of race, or I'm male and I'm not a female or whatever. Let's just assume. So okay, there's some baseline advantage. I'm still starting from no parents sending me to fancy school, no grades. I got a chance to go to a magnet school because my aunt was a school teacher and she got me tested. And I wasn't able to go for a variety of reasons, one of which being the cost. And if I'd have went to that school, I probably would have gotten a scholarship. A whole bunch of stuff could have been very different, but it wasn't. So to me, and the way I was brought up, when I got that job at Apple, making $14 at a job I was probably never going to get fired for, where I had these great benefits, and there was a path or whatever, was like, that was it, right? That was amazing. And entrepreneurs all the time, I talk to them, and the entrepreneur thing just really bugs me, because Inc. magazine is a romance novel for startup nerds, and it's all fake. I know some of the people. I've seen some of the people on the cover. I've known them and met them. And it's like, you read the story, you're like, wow, that is not the story they told me at all, or whatever. And it's marketing, and that's great. But the thing is, nobody doing entrepreneurship knows shit about what they're fucking talking about. Like, any of these guys and gals that are like, you gotta hustle, and the super 10x mega, and you go on LinkedIn and everybody's got they're a visionary leader, influencer, whatever. That right. Just means unemployed, right? like they're just unemployed. I mean, I told that to somebody who had a meeting there. They're like, I'm meeting with this guy. He is a visionary influencer. He's a board member, an advisor, and a funding capitalist or something. And I was like, that person has no job. And they're like, oh man, you're so harsh on people. Like, I'm meeting him for coffee or whatever. My friend Donald, he came in later and he goes, well, you nailed that meeting.
He was asking me, what do you got going?
Right. Yeah. But the point to kind of tie that kind of ramble together is like, yeah, I grew up without means, and who gives a shit? Hard work, even today, still can't be beat. It just can't be. And especially today, I used to take and cut out of cereal boxes UPC codes, save them, put them in an envelope with a form, ride my bike, 15 blocks or so over to the post office and drop it, a letter. That's a device for the youngsters. It was like a paper you could put other paper in and seal it and put a stamp on it, which was, and send it off. A physical mail, and 6 weeks, 12 weeks, 18 weeks later, some piece of electronic magic would show up at my house, hopefully not damaged by the U.S. Postal Service shoving it through the mail slot in our front door, right? And kids today, they go on Amazon. First of all, they can go on the internet and get a credit card like the moment they're available, and they boom, they're funded. They get like $5,000 in credit. Go on Amazon, get an Arduino, a laptop, a soldering gun, all this stuff, and half that shit can be primed in 2 hours. So it's like, I have no sympathy for entrepreneurs today, for people who are like, I have an idea, I don't know what to do. Really, you live in the greatest time to be alive in the history of entrepreneurship. Apple will fund your company for like $29 a month. They'll give you a laptop. You do it as a software company, go to Apple. They'll give you a laptop. And the internet and all the open source and all the everything. And it's like, I have no sympathy for it. And so it's like, yeah, growing up like that taught me the value of hard work. Hard work, turns out, is now the advantage I have because people don't work hard. I mean, I interview people all the time who are like, and I'm not trying to bash millennials. There are some great millennials, and they maybe, there was this great Saturday Night Live skit a couple weeks ago that was like Millennial Millions. So it was a game show, and the girl's like, oh, I just really plan. I'm hoping to get those health benefits. And I was like, oh man, it's tough working at a startup. What's the name of your company? And she's like, Google, and the other kid was like, oh, I have a degree from, this great college. I have all this stuff. I'm interning at Burger King. And he's like, the corporate office? And he's like, no. and they were playing this game where they hit it and they get stuff, but to win the game, they had to get past a baby boomer, right? So the people born at the right time where America was great and everything was awesome, and they just got everything handed to them. It's kind of the way they had positioned it. And so they, they're like, all right, you just won Social Security, and they're like, oh, free money when I die, when I'm old, and they're like, not if a boomer wants it. And you got to face the parrot boomer, and she comes out and she's like, she was a banker for 30 years and retired and all this, and all you have to do is listen to her for 30 seconds. They're like, that sounds easy. It's like, oh, but I know how you millennials, they get all this shit. But the point is, I do talk to all these young people, and there's two problems. When I say young people, I say people under 40 are young, okay? And there's two problems. Number one, they're reading all this shit online, and they're going to these stupid fucking events and podcasts and listen to all this bullshit about being an entrepreneur. All right, and it's all such bullshit about this hustle hard and do this and all of this other crap. And they're like, well, I heard insert famous podcaster here say you just gotta blah blah blah. And it's like, yeah, did that person ever do that? No. So why are you listening to them, right? And they're like, well, they interviewed other person who did that. Right. Is that how they made? No. Okay. How can you not correlate like the simplest of things, right? And the second problem is the unicorn, the $1 billion company is the dumbest thing I've ever heard of. $1 billion company. Who cares? Apple has $245 billion in cash on hand. IBM will make $100 billion plus this year. Goldman Sachs will make maybe $40 billion this year. Why is $1 billion company such a big deal? Because somebody randomly picked it out and said $1 billion.
Well, we like even numbers.
Well, apparently even small numbers, right? Nobody even knows how big.
This is a classic tech universe sense of small. For a lot of people, $1 billion is enormous.
But it's not. That's the problem. The problem is we don't teach people basic things like math, right? Like Jeff Bezos is going through a divorce and they're like, his wife's going to get $66 billion. It's like, no, she's not. He doesn't have $66 billion to give her. It's not how market caps work, right? That's not how the stock market works. It's not how any of this works. So we have these entrepreneurs going out trying to start these businesses based on these fantasies of, I'm going to build $1 billion company, which mathematically I can prove to you they're not, almost right off the bat. And all of this fantasy about money and economics and how it works, and it doesn't work that way at all, when they could all be going and building a $20 million company or $40 million company that they own all of and selling it and be incredibly happy. They could make $500,000 and, they can make $1 million after tax, buy a place for $250,000 to $500,000 almost anywhere that they're living, okay, except for California, but that's completely fucked. But outside of there,
right?
And then they could take the other $500,000, be like, I'm going to pay myself $100,000 a year for 5 years. I'm going to do nothing, right? This is the thing about entrepreneurship. They shouldn't be working to change the world. That's a bunch of bullshit. They shouldn't be working for money. That's a bunch of bullshit. They should be working to get the one thing none of us can get more of: time, right? Freedom of our time. They should be working for freedom, right? They should work for freedom, and they can do everything. I was mentoring this kid earlier, and he's like, well, Richard Branson, I think, is really taking a liking to whales or whatever bullshit, and he's going to go save whales. It's like, Richard Branson is fucking awesome. I love that guy. But you also realize he has access to billions of dollars. If Richard Branson decides, I want to save the endangered whatever the fuck, I've decided I'm taking the next 3 years off to do it, nobody's going to say shit, and a bunch of people just shower money at his cause. You're not Richard Branson, Like,
well, I think there's this feeling that it's sort of the same thing as asking somebody who gets out of school, what do you want to do? And they say, I want to work at a nonprofit. It's like, okay, well, nonprofit is a tax designation.
Yeah, there's no such thing.
So, what do you want to do? Because there's nonprofits that work in all kinds of actual industries and providing particular kinds of services, whether it's healthcare, education, or whatever. But it is this wanting to be part of something meaningful, but not necessarily having a sense of what it means to be meaningful, and so you're kind of chasing like a ghost in that way.
It's not. I don't think it is. See,
you don't think that's what's driving that sense?
I think what we need in the world is some honesty. They're not looking for something meaningful themselves. When I break these people down, and I talk to hundreds of them, and I really break them down, what they're looking for is something other people will look at and say, that person is awesome. And they're looking for fame, or they're looking for money, or they're looking for people to look up, or they're going to have 1 billion Instagrams or likes or whatever. I have met, out of thousands of people, maybe 50 that honestly just like, they're like Mother Teresa going to do some good. The majority of people I hear that from, to start off, it's complete bullshit. It's like, well, what do you want to do? Well, I want to do this thing. Well, why? Well, blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, that's great. And then you start giving, like, that's awesome. This is how it would work, and this is what it looks like. Oh, well, that doesn't look good at all. Right, but you're dedicated to this cause, right? So, I mean, should it matter what it looks like? Well, yeah. I mean, because I somehow thought also while I'm doing the good, I would make billions of dollars. I'd be like Richard Branson, and then I'd be like, just doing cool stuff all the time. It's like, yeah, well, those are very different. And my point isn't that you shouldn't do good in the world, or that you shouldn't want to make money. My point is that there is only one thing we can't generate more of, and that is time. And so if you look at your resources and you look at what you have, you should be working to get more of the time in your control for which you can apply it to whatever you want. And then you can do all of these wonderful things, right? If you like, I contribute to a lot of different charities. My wife and I don't say who they are for the most part. There's a couple that come out every once in a while. We do different things because it's nobody's fucking business. Because I'm not doing it to get fucking Instagram followers or people love me on Facebook or whatever, right? I like causes with kids. I like things that are programs for kids. Foster kids are real big for my wife and I right now, right? She's super in that because foster care system is just fucking shit, right? Animals, cool. You know, there's a bunch of different stuff. That's about all I care to say about it. But the point is, I had this guy this week that I was talking to say, well, you do these things, I know, because my dad said you're a big contributor to blah, blah, blah. It's like, yeah, but I can be. Like, you don't understand. Like, we're in two completely different worlds. I sold a company to Accenture, and I sold to Zynga, and I sold to Goldman Sachs. I've invested in 14 others. It's all yeah, it's very, yes, I can do that. I can be like, yes, I would, all of a sudden I want to write a check to something. Being an entrepreneur is like being a passenger on an airplane. You have to know where all of the exits are, right? You're restricted by all of these factors. You're in a tiny space, and you don't have a lot of stuff, and you have limited amounts of this and that. And when it comes to the oxygen, if you have to use it, you have to put your mask on first, and then you can help other people around you. And there are so many young people wasting their lives not establishing a base for themselves first before they go help, with their hearts in the right place. And I mean, God bless them for giving a shit about the world, because Lord knows a lot of people my age didn't, right? And they're not going to make any progress because they don't understand that there's a mechanism, a mechanics to it of getting yourself in a position where you're stable enough to actually help somebody else. It's kind of like loving yourself, right? You can't love somebody else in a relationship unless you love yourself. It's like, well, you can't go out and help change the world unless you're doing it from some solid base, because it's really fucking hard.
So let's go back to how you came to be in that position, right? So you are at Apple.
Robbed a bank. Oh, sorry. Is that the first time that came out in the interview?
You took a detour down a road of extreme crime.
Right.
And then that gave you
Never
an economic
got caught,
foundation.
Now, right. The IRS is already looking into that. The AI has already identified it.
We're all we all commit 3 crimes a day in the Federal Register, so we're all
just
criminals
got flagged.
But so I got this little bit of entrepreneurial activity before working at Apple, but you're getting paid a wage. You're working at Apple. How do you start to then
$14 an hour to about $90,000 a year? I go from $90,000 a year to a little over $100,000 in R&D, and I'm just like, and every time I'm like, I'm done. I've made it. This is the best it'll ever get.
So what's that entrepreneurial leap? Your first truly like entrepreneurial leap. I'm going to start something from scratch.
I leave IBM in 1991. I don't start something, but I join a couple of other guys to start a company at late 1999, right at 2000.
Right. Great timing.
Brilliant timing. And one of the guys, still a friend to this day, cool dude. Other guy had no idea what the fuck he was doing. Embezzled some money from the company. Other guy, almost kills the guy, just like fucking horrible disaster. That led to me moving to Vegas for a short time to break into casinos for a living, doing penetration testing, because you fall back on whatever, you can do.
At this point, I take it your hacking skills have been kicked up a notch.
Yeah, it's several notches, right? So
Yes.
It's like, hey, I can legally get paid for that. And
you've skipped over
then
being what were you at IBM? You were a master inventor.
I was a principal engineer and a master inventor, and then I was a manager in the internet business unit. And then I basically so the way I got involved with that company is I was dating one of the guy's sisters. That's how I found out about this entrepreneurial activity. And she moved to Vegas. I I don't think she had the intention of me coming out to Vegas. But then she kind of used me to get out there to give her some support while she figured out her stuff. And I woke up one day and I realized it, and I was like, I'm out of here. And I went, literally was like, she woke up and she's like, what's going on? It's like, in about 5 minutes, a cab's going to pick me up and I'm never going to speak to you again. So if you have anything to say, now would be a really good time. And she's like, what? And then it was like, beep, beep. And I was like, took my stuff and I went to the cab and I drove to the airport. And from the airport, I called Mike Irwin, who's my longtime friend and current, investment partner at our new fund, Ecliptic Capital. And I was like, hey, I'm leaving Nancy. I'm coming back to Austin. That's where I belong. And he was pretty much like, I never fucking liked that bitch anyway. I'll pick you up at the airport. And he did. And he said, I've got this security company that I'm working on, and you should join it. So it was the second startup I kind of joined. He gives me founder credit, but I mean, in all honesty, I really didn't deserve it, right? I was...
You were like employee number one with...
Yeah. I was like super...
With the stakes in it, yeah.
Yeah. And that company was super cool, except for not popular with government entities, including ours. So we'll leave it there. That company goes away. It detailed all the attackers on the internet, where they were, and the largest two attackers were the U.S. and Chinese government. Shock.
Right. So just to make sure everybody understands that. So Mike's got a company that's identifying who's doing malicious things online in
right.
What is this, 2000, 2001?
This is 2003, 2004 now.
Okay, so yeah.
And
lo and behold, the federal government is the biggest hacker screwing around with people. We know this has now become kind of public knowledge.
I say that kind of as a joke, but what happened was
you were engaged in a kind of mini Snowden event.
No, nothing like. I mean, we just built some really cool software that other people liked, and they took it. So, ta-da! Second bad entrepreneurial experience. Learned a whole ton.
So at this point, you've been, you've now spent years, in a certain sense, failing, joining things that don't pan out.
No, I don't say that, and not because I'm afraid of, because I have plenty of failures, but because I had this great job at Apple and this great job at IBM. I left, made a mistake. Then I was doing this contracting stuff, which is kind of fun. Then I joined Mike. So you're really talking about 2000 to 2004 were kind of 4 years of joining a couple of things, and they didn't work out. The companies failed.
Yeah.
It's really important to distinguish this. And entrepreneurs, I tell them this all the time. What failed? Well, I failed. Well, wait, did you fail? Like where were you when you began that journey, and where were you when you ended that journey? And what was your goal? If your goal was to get millions of dollars and you didn't, then yeah, you failed. My goal in joining the first company and my goal in joining Mike were similar but a little different. My goal in joining the first company was to A, get out of IBM, right? And B, to like dip my toe in the startup waters. And I was like, whoa, there's like sharks and piranhas and stuff in those waters. And it was useful. I didn't lose my house. I didn't lose my car. I didn't have any tragedy happen. It wasn't a failure for me. Was it a black mark on my career? Not really. I mean, I didn't create the whole, sure, maybe. Who cares, right? I mean, you're going to have to, this is the problem everybody's afraid of. They're so afraid of failure or looking like a failure or saying it didn't work out that they're never going to go do anything, right? Like you have to go do, like the person you watch doing the sport or the thing or those BMX guys that do all this crazy stuff. It's like, yeah, they break a lot of bones and they practice a lot and they definitely have not pulled that trick off every time, right? And being an entrepreneur is exactly the same way, right? But for me, it was like I had a very definite plan when I left IBM. Get out of IBM. So huge success and be able to pay the bills. that all worked out great. Okay.
But you got to see at some level that you could survive. You could, as a person, it's like this is like your lesson, right? You survive as a person even if these ventures don't.
No, but
survive.
I learned. But okay, so failure is supposed to bring lessons or whatever, however you want to position it. I learned the most valuable lesson ever. I learned the Mike Irwin valuation metric, which is CEO is basically gonna go to fucking jail or whatever for embezzling money. COO / girlfriend's brother is like, fuck this, I'm out. Totally understandable. He's leaving. Investors are like, you're the CEO, right? I mean, you worked at IBM and you did a management, close enough. I'm like, what? So now I'm running the thing, and my job is to try to get some value out of. So, I mean, I have no idea what I'm doing, right? And I call Mike and I say, I don't know what I'm doing. I need your help. And Mike comes over and stands at the whiteboard and he helps me figure out the company's worth. And he goes, all right, so this furniture and stuff, did you buy that or did you lease it? And did you this? And he's like, your company's worth like $147,000, 364 cents. And I'm just like, what the fuck? And I was like, whoa. And I was like, yeah. And there were a bunch of good lessons there. So 2004 was like not the bad part. 2004 to 2005, 2006 was the bad part. And that was where, when the company, Mike and I was so dedicated to the company, I did something entrepreneurs should never do, which is I fell in love. And
with the company.
When I couldn't afford a house because I lost mine, I moved in with Mike and Jamie. And then I was in my car. And then my car payments were behind. And, we weren't making any money, but it's like I was just like religiously devout to this cause of what we were doing. And by the way, still think it was one of the greatest things I ever got to work on, and I love it to death. But you can't drink your own Kool-Aid, and you can't. You still have to put yourself first before this thing that you've created, right? It can't be Frankenstein. You know what I mean? And that was where I really failed. And it's not failing as a company, failing as an idea. These things don't bother me. Failing myself, that's what I did. And that bothers me to this day, because I lost the house I was living in. I took my car back to Chase Bank to be repossessed because every day the guy would drive through the parking lot at our company, the repo guy, looking for the car, and he wouldn't find it, because every morning I'd go over to the Lowe's that was like a quarter mile away, and Mike would pick me up at the Lowe's, and I'd leave my car in the Lowe's parking lot all day, and I'd come over to work, right? It should have never got to that point that I was willing to give up so much for this idea, for this concept.
Is that really your advice, though? Isn't that? I mean, for some people, that, I mean, I understand, like, you're looking back and in retrospect,
it really is.
You sacrificed yourself.
It really is.
But why is that? Isn't that often what it takes to get something to work? I mean, if I remember correctly, the story of the guy from FedEx, like, he couldn't get it to work, and he had to take a loan out to make payroll.
All of that you'll have to do to a point. There's a difference between commitment and sacrifice. What he did is commitment. There's calculated risk. What I did was blind sacrifice to a goal. It wasn't even a question. I didn't even think about paying the car payments. I didn't even think about doing anything. It was like an addiction, right? That's the what I'm advising against. And it was the only time it's happened in my career. And I still, if you ask me would I do it again, I still love the idea. I still love, right? I mean, it's like that one girlfriend or boyfriend or significant other you had that you're just like, you're never going to be able to let go of that. That's the one that got away. But yeah, it doesn't, you sacrifice things to an extent as an entrepreneur. Time with your family, not going on vacations, not having, I got to take out a loan, I got to do this, I got to do that. But these things have to be calculated. But to have blinders on to lose objectivity, to lose perspective, that is super dangerous. And I see tons of people that do it, and I know it because I did it. And I can see it every time I talk to an entrepreneur. I can see it in their eyes. No matter what I tell them, no matter what happens, there is no way they are not going to do the crazy thing they just said they're going to do. And you're just like, right, but I'm looking at it from the outside, and you're actually standing on the edge of a building, and it looks like you're literally about to step off of the Empire State Building and fall to your death. And they're like, when I step off here,
I'm going to fly.
Magically, right? and that,
although some people, they're right.
Almost never. That's the illusion, is we tell these entrepreneurial myths. We create these myths of the entrepreneur that make you think that sometimes it works out that way. And it doesn't. If you actually objectively look at the stories where there's sacrifice and commitment and success and all these things we're talking about, they're different stories. And this is where I came up with the data not drama principle, right? How I run startups.
So explain, lay that out. Explain.
So it's really simple. I took everything I learned through that time. I went to work for this startup in 2006. You know, I told that story earlier, how Tom Bishop and Brian Behlendorf recommended me for this job, and I was lucky. And they recommended me because they both knew I was just like borderline unemployable. Like this government thing and everything, it just wrecked my career, that blind ambition, right? And I jumped on this job, and I knew it would lead to a job at BMC probably, and it did. I went on, joined the management team at BMC, and I took my career. It was as if those 4 years were never a blip. It wasn't like I got reset and I had to build myself back up. It was like I magically somehow came out on the other side of those with all of these lessons and everything, but in an incredibly different spot, incredibly different position. And I'm super lucky for that having happened. But I wanted to learn something from it. And so when I was at BMC is when I started.
What is BMC? Like, so you
It's BMC
so you're coming out of this,
one of the big system management companies. What used to be the big three: Computer Associates, Tivoli, BMC. These are kind of the big three system management companies.
And what does that mean? Like, what like for somebody who doesn't know
they write
tech,
the software that runs most of the stuff that you use every day that you never see. The systems that manage everything from the stuff the ATMs use to the stuff the banks use to all the boring
inventory
software
all
and
this
the
kind of stuff.
background of everything, right?
So they're like a big kind of back office infrastructure company.
They do a couple billion a year, I think, or they were at the time, and you know it was a good gig, great company. And Bob Beecham, who was CEO when I joined, is still a good friend. He's actually one of the individuals I let invest in Strangeworks, right? So many great things came out of that thing, and I got to work with Tom Bishop again. I worked with him at Tivoli. I worked for him at BMC. He worked for me at Honest Dollar. Like we've had this great, like kind of weird mix of career. So it was a great thing. But the thing that came out of it, the thing that's like the most important to note is, I started paying attention to these different lessons, combination of things I gleaned from mentors, which I've been very lucky to have a lot of older, wiser mentors, things I'd picked up, things I learned in that 4 years. I started kind of noting them down. And started saying, I really like the idea of being my own boss, but I realize I'm not ready. That doesn't mean you can't be a 20-year-old entrepreneur or whatever. It's not an age thing. It's just I knew I wasn't ready.
So what time is it? What year is this?
This is 2006 or so, 2006, 2007. I go to work at BMC. 2006, I think. And I took the time to realize that we're all meant to do something better than everybody else. This is what comes back to the sacrifice thing. So the first lesson is there's something that you are inherently better at than 90% of the population. And if you find that thing, it may not be the thing you're passionate about or you love, but man, you can make a living and just coast. And for me, that thing was building these open source software communities and doing the presentations and the speaking and doing the stuff. And I don't really like doing that. I still don't like doing it. And I do tons of it all the time, but it just comes so naturally. And I turned it into a career that was like, I was making tons of money at BMC, providing tons of value. They loved it. I loved them. They loved me. But actual stress, actual output, actual work, It was pretty minimal. It was the most leverage I could get out of a job.
So dig into that just a little bit more. Like, what were you doing? Like, what
So
is
I was
this?
a
What
chief-
is this thing
I
that
was
you
the
were really
chief
good at?
architect of their open source strategy. And so that meant going out in the open source communities, building communities, identifying very obscure ideas of what we could take and maybe make open source and how we could leverage that back internally, how we could take other things and support the community to do things. And it was...
So, like, for example, like, theoretically, it's like, hey, there's a
No, I'll give you...
open source. Yeah, give me like a
I'll give you a
tangible
great idea.
example. Yeah.
I'll give you a great idea. Say you have a piece of, and this isn't necessarily a BMC example, this is just like a generic example. Say that you're a large company, you have a lot of different software products, a lot of different software SKUs. So you got a list of software you sell, and there's a whole bunch of them. Some of that software is going to be end of lifed, right? But there's customers out there that really depend on that. So why couldn't you take that software, and I did this in a couple different jobs, give it to the customers and say, I'm going to make it open source so you can contribute to it. So now they're supporting it, adding features, doing stuff if you can build the right community around it. So you open source it, send it out. You're now not spending the R&D. You're now not spending a fraction of that on just supporting this community. And instead of end-of-lifing a product and pissing them off, you've actually kind of handed it over to them. They're super happy. The company's super happy. But now there's companies that still want to use that, but they want support. And they don't want to go on the forums at 2 a.m. and say, my data center just crashed because the thing didn't work. They want to pick up the bat phone. So then you could take that version of software, bless it in a blessed version, and offer a support package about it. So you reduce the cost, you've made the community happier, you've got the infrastructure. It was like this, really happy circle. So doing these big kind of very strategic things and then being out evangelizing them, right? And these were kind of the two things that I was doing at that particular job.
So your special, what you found is your kind of comparative advantage to be an econ nerd was building communities, being out in the world, sort of being an evangelist for an idea.
It's really simple. I have the ability to identify opportunities other people don't see and to measure fairly accurate the timing of the opportunity and the risk of the opportunity. And then from there, I'm pretty good at executing, right? It's really those three things. It's saying quantum computing is coming not in 20 years, but in 3. I have enough data, I think I can show that that's real. Here's all of the risk around if it doesn't happen in 3, if it doesn't whatever, and I can execute on it. And the thing I've added later in my career is I can build really good teams around me to follow through on that, right?
I mean, you're defining what it means to be an entrepreneur, to see an opportunity, to have an awareness of it that is not
Exactly.
I think Peter Thiel has that book 0 to 1, and it's a neat book. And one of the things I really love in it is he asks the question, "What do you believe or know to be true that almost everyone else thinks is false?"
Right.
And it's kind of the same. I mean, that's
and
quantum
the big
computing for you,
I like that book as well because I like basically the 0 to 1 concept, which is like doing something that's just iterative and an incremental improvement on something else is not where the big opportunity is, right? Doing something that nobody else is doing, those are where the big opportunities are. But the point is putting together these lessons. We'll get back to the data, not drama, like you asked in just a second. But one of the lessons was understanding the difference between control and influence, right? And learning that managerials, I prefer to influence people rather than to control them. I don't tell people do this. I give people the opportunity and the environment in which they will do the thing that is best for the company, and it may not be the thing that I think they should do, right? So there's this freedom. So I have this kind of understanding the difference between control and influence was kind of the first rule that came up. The second rule that came up was understanding the difference between reaction and response, right? And the example I like to give of this is Steve Jobs and AntennaGate, right? So why is reaction and response important as an entrepreneur? Because somebody that works for you comes with an idea and they go, hey, I got this great thing. And everybody I see, every entrepreneur, every manager has this habit of saying, yeah, but we don't, because they've almost instantly shot that down. They have no evidence of anything they're saying. They just emotionally just killed that idea, and it could be the greatest thing for the company. And they don't know. They just it's like a autonomous feature in our brains as humans to be like, right, but I've never dated someone that hot, John, therefore you can't, obviously, right? I mean, you know what I mean? It's like this weird taking your experience and projecting it right onto other people. But a classic example I give is AntennaGate comes up. AntennaGate versus Tim Cook, Chinese workers jumping to their death.
So lay it out for those of us that aren't reading TechCrunch every day.
So AntennaGate, if you hold an iPhone, shock, your body's a big bag of water, the signal gets reduced. And people are like, the iPhone has a design flaw, the way the antenna's laid out. It's the end of the iPhone. It's the end of Apple, clearly. And we know now.
Yeah.
Not
this is
true.
like iPhone 4. So this
is like not true at all, right?
Years ago.
And they're
is it like a decade ago? I think it's almost a decade ago.
They're railing on Apple. And Jobs doesn't say a word. He doesn't say anything. Apple doesn't make a statement. Everybody's just beating up on Apple, the stock price. CNBC's like, AntennaGate. You know, they come up with this. And by the way, I don't know why everything has to be a gate because of Watergate. It's like this gate, that gate, this gate, that gate, Pizzagate, AntennaGate, all these gates. Gate's a horrible way to describe some controversy.
Well, it's a natural language.
We should come up with
nobody planned it that way. It was just the Watergate was the name of a hotel. It's like people don't realize that it was the name of a hotel.
I've stayed there.
It's not a verb.
My
it's not an adjective. That's a thing.
Right. Exactly. It's like that doesn't even make any sense to me. But what happened with AntennaGate is he waited for what seemed like forever. I think it was like a couple of weeks, and he comes out on stage, and he shows pictures of all these other phones doing it. He shows pictures of this $100 million plus antenna facility. He shows everything. And Steve Jobs basically comes out in a classic example of response versus reaction, because one is voluntary and the other is not. Okay, reaction is a emotional, I'm going to tell you something, I haven't even put any thought into it. Steve Jobs not only thought about it, had an entire team think about it, gets out on stage and basically says, I had to fix the entire cell phone, and now I have to fix the whole fucking infrastructure too? You idiots, right? And one reporter, you can go on YouTube and Google, says, hey, wait a second. And Steve Jobs basically goes, and ooh, right in the head. And everybody's like, he's genius, right? And it was all about how he handled that by responding to it and not reacting. Tim Cook, who I love, okay, I've met on several occasions, a super great guy. The workers jump out, writes a letter and says, this is horrible, which it is. And then Apple says, don't worry, solution with Foxconn, ooh, nets. That's a reaction, not a response. And you saw how the press reacts to Steve Jobs, greatest visionary of our time. I don't know why all of you were talking about this antenna problem, right? Every reporter that wrote about it wrote an article that was like, and the press did this thing because they're idiots, right? Even though they did it too. You put nets up. Your solution is we put nets on the building so Chinese workers that jump to the death will fall in the nets. People are like, that does not seem cool at all. In fact, that really concerns me, and it caused a huge controversy for Apple, right? Because you don't always have to respond. One of the lessons I learned is no matter what decision you're making as an entrepreneur, you can sleep on it for 24 to 72 hours. And I promise you, in 72 hours, I don't care if the bank's calling on the loan or the customer's going to leave or the whatever. If you just don't think about it for 72 hours, I guarantee you that situation will look completely different. And I guarantee you, again, barring someone has a gun to your head, nothing will change in 72 hours. I don't care what somebody yells on the phone or sends in a letter or you read the press. Just sit on it for 72 hours and trust me, it will be completely different and you will be in a much different spot with a much clearer head and you'll make a much better decision and you will respond to what's happening instead of reacting to it. And reacting to it is what gets most entrepreneurs in trouble. When they react to an investor, they try to jump on an opportunity. A customer says, we have a problem, and they react to it. They can often exacerbate the problem instead of saying, we're gonna look at that problem. I'm going to need 48 hours to get back to you. And then go panic by yourself in the room in your office. Don't let anybody see it. And then go back with something prepared and the customer will appreciate that. Don't, flip out, overreact, you know what I mean? Those things. So there were all these lessons. All of it, there's a lot.
Well, we're definitely in the era of reactions.
Yeah, everything's
in general.
a reaction.
There's no 72 hours. You can't even get by without 72 seconds, without needing
But here's
to
the thing.
react to whatever.
But here's the thing. But you can. The reality is you can. All of the stuff we're seeing in politics, some of these people could just keep their mouth shut for a weekend and then come out. There's no need. Like Twitter and Facebook and all these things have bred this thing that like click instant response. Somehow the instant gratification has led to this instant reaction. Like if I don't comment now and I want the first to get out in front of this, it's like, well, it's already out. You're not in front of it.
Right.
So just wait 72 hours and then say something really smart that makes everybody go, ooh, I should have thought of that. I feel like an idiot for all the comments I threw out over the weekend, right? You know what I mean? But all of these different things, and there's a whole bunch of different rules, led to this concept of data, not drama. And the idea is that when I start a startup, when I run it, everybody can question every decision I make. Every employee can be like, I think you're a fucking idiot. All I ask is that they bring some empirical evidence to that conversation. They can't say, people don't like our interface. They need to say, I actually talked to and recorded interviews with these 20 people who don't like our interface, and this is what they said. I can accept that all day long. I can go out and say, do a presentation, and they can just say like, I think that presentation sucked. They have to say, I didn't think the presentation was really well, so I surveyed 50 people in the audience, and 10 of them brought up these points, and this is what they said, and I relevance ranked them, and here's how we could refactor that in the future. Like, you have to have some sort of evidence, right? Because the whole point of being an entrepreneur, the whole point of what I'm saying is that you can be more successful faster and keep yourself out of all of this bullshit stress we read about. I sleep fine at night. I sleep like a baby. Do I get enough of it? No, I overcommit on my schedule and stuff. But the point is like, you read all these horror stories, Elon Musk is sleeping on the floor at Tesla. Well, that sounds fucking dumb. Okay. all this stuff you read about that we romanticize, that we're teaching these young entrepreneurs, like, well, that's what you have to do. You have to do these horrible life decisions, or else you get, it's like, it's the equivalent of,
I have slept on the floor, many times.
But it's
at Viacom, and it was not entrepreneurial.
It's the equivalent.
Employee,
but it's the equivalent of you being a rock star and us telling all young musicians at the teenage camp, now listen, kids, you are going to have to pick up a habit, either coke or heroin, and you're also going to have like a lot of unprotected sex, get a disease, and then you're probably going to have to get in a car crash. These are going to be prerequisites for you being successful rock star, right? I mean, that's the equivalent of it, right? We're telling them all these stupid stories. The point is, data not drama as a concept is this concept of being objective with all things, starting with yourself. Like, I know when I fucked up, and I have no problem telling that to my team. I'm not going to lose credibility with my team. I'm going to gain it in boatloads. I mean, the shortest relationship at my company right now, we just hired this amazing person, and she's great. We don't know her, so she's technically the shortest. But before her was 8 years. The longest is 27. These are people who followed me forever. There are tons of relationships I have like that because being objective. And it's really hard to have the tough conversations. At Honest Dollar, when we got to Goldman, we thought that they were going to be the they're evil, they're going to be harsh and all. And, we used to have this joke where we said at Honest Dollar, like, we have met the assholes and they are us. Because it was like, wow, turns out the startup got, like, we were the evil, like, horrible. We were like, we're going to just own this bitch. And they're like, whoa, guys, hang on. We have all of these things we think about before we do them. We're like, right, but we'll just write the code. Boom, right? And I was like, that was eye-opening experience. But we would build this credibility, right? And we'd do these things by being objective. And we got this nickname, Brutally Honest Dollar. But the reason is because people aren't objective. Like, it's a great example. Right now, the first thing I do when I'm interviewing companies that are asking me for money, not at the fund, but individually, because the fund has a very specific thesis, and it's not for like, you just got an idea, come ask us for money, right? But I do that. I mean, like, there's projects I'm like, that sounds great, I'll put money in it. So I meet these people, and I try to start by teaching them the first lesson without it sounding like you're being an asshole, which can be hard, but it's not. It's meant to really help them understand what they're about to embark on. You have this girl and this guy and this other guy, and she's the CEO, and he's the CTO, and he's the COO. And she was a project manager at whatever design company, and he was a project manager at LinkedIn, who's the COO, and the CTO guy was a developer, senior developer, maybe even a team lead at some software company. But they've now started this company, and they've printed CTO and co-founder on the card. And you say, well, what were you CTO of before? Well, I wasn't. Oh, well, how are you the CTO? Oh, well, because I made myself CTO. Okay, well, what did you do before? Oh, well, I was a developer. Okay, well, I mean, I get that, and you can write code and stuff, but like, why are you the CTO? Or you were a project manager. How does that make you a COO? Is it there? I mean, they both organize stuff. But it's like kind of the difference between like, my kid has an airplane of Delta Airlines. It's made of plastic that I bought him, that he goes, flies around pretending a house. And then there's like that new stealth Boeing thing that stays in orbit for 365 days autonomously. We don't know. They both have wings and wheels and fly. They are ridiculously different, right? I mean, the thing is, these people, it's so easy for us as entrepreneurs to be like, I just started a company and I'm the CEO. It's like, what has prepared you for that job? Other than your ego says you want to be a CEO or a CTO. And so it's like, starting with this foundation of objectivity really, really helps, because the reason most of these people fail is they're doing a job that they can't do. But we convince them that they can. And that doesn't mean that they can't be entrepreneurs. And that doesn't mean that they can't be successful. But we give them this false construct. Like, you go to Vistaprint, you print a card, and you say you're CEO. And you've never been a CEO. You've never even been a manager. But now you're a CEO. So you're managing everything and raising money. You have no idea what a CEO even does. And then somebody gives you money in a convertible note or a safe note because they read in Inc. magazine that that's the way to invest in a startup. And then you lose that money. And then they're pissed and they're somehow shocked that you lost that money. I would tell you they can lose that money 100% of the time. They have no idea what they're doing. I mean, I guess the point is, in the world of entrepreneurship, we have completely lost objectivity by romanticizing something that's incredibly difficult, that takes a lot of years of experience. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't be CEO. Doesn't mean that you can't. But for God's sakes, go find yourself a couple of mentors. Because my next question for those kids is, well, who's mentoring you on being a CEO? Well, nobody. Or one person did say very, very affirmatively, he said, oh, I read Startup CEO. It's a very good book. I was like, you read that, the whole book? And he goes, I've read it maybe 3 times. I keep it with me. He pulled it out. He goes, he has stuff bookmarked and he's highlighted. And I was like, well, it's better than the majority of people I talk to. But, I also read a book on quantum computing. And I would tell you that the physicist that works for me now would be like, yeah, not so much.
So I want to come back to your entrepreneurial story, and we can kind of take a look at this principle. Because some of these principles sound a little bit like you've been around the block on starting these things, and you're telling your past self advice. So before Honest Dollar, before Strangeworks, there was Chaotic Moon.
Yeah, but it's not. I'll tell you why. Because I joined 2 things, and I knew I didn't want to be CEO. And when I started Chaotic Moon, we specifically started a company where there was no CEO. And then when I started Honest Dollar, we cut and drew straws to see who would be CEO, and I lost. And my favorite moment was when Goldman Sachs took me this really nice dinner. We had a great evening because they were trying to butter me up because they were going to give me the bad news of like, now that we've bought you, you're not going to be able to be CEO anymore. You know that, right? And I was like, woohoo! Like, because I'm sorry, but my personal belief, this is not everyone's belief, is there are only two people who are CEOs. Narcissistic assholes and people who have no idea what they're doing or haven't yet figured out that being CEO is literally the shittiest, worst job where you get blamed for everything. It's all your fault. Legally, somehow you're bound to be responsible. Like, it's horrible. I like the CTO title. I like some of the lower titles, but I've never been a fan of being that. So that's just been experience. I just now have the experience to justify why. It turns out I was right on that one. But yeah, a lot of before all of that, there was Chaotic Moon, right?
So what is Chaotic Moon? How does it get started? Who's involved?
2006, Raven Zachary and I and Chris Messina and Dom Segol and some guys formed the iPhone Dev Camp. So a week after the iPhone comes out, we put 400 hackers in Adobe's offices in San Francisco to hack around on apps for the iPhone. You could still find the videos on the internet pretty easily.
And this is before the App Store, right?
This is when Steve Jobs said there wasn't going to be an app store. There's no SDK, there's no apps. So we hack them, we build these web apps, we build this stuff. Really creative stuff comes out of this. O'Reilly.
And so this is leveraging that community building.
Look, and it was leveraging more than that. I mean, Raven Zachary deserves, in my opinion, 100% of the credit for getting that idea off the ground, right? And other people have taken credit for it since, and we were all involved, and we all deserve credit to an extent. I feel very lucky that Raven called me as one of the people to get involved, but I always say, he had the original epiphany and deserves a lot of the credit. And all of the people involved had massive community building skills. And that's how, like, in such a short time, you had like 400 people, gathered, right? But what happened is, O'Reilly was there, and they're like, we're going to do books on iPhones. We're going to do books. And everybody started an iPhone consulting company. And everybody there knew what Apple pretended not to know, but I think knew, which was there's going to be an app economy. Every single person that showed up. And I had watched this IBM video. It's the creepiest video you'll ever see. You should Google it. It's like IBM Linux Child or something. We'll find it. And it's got this little boy sitting in a room, and you hear this man's voice, and this woman's voice, and they're talking about this little boy. And the little boy is Linux. Okay, it's really creepy. And the one of them's like, "What is he doing?" And the other one's like, "Learning." And it's like, what is he learning? Like, everything or whatever. It was like really, really, really creepy. And it's got all these famous people, like Muhammad Ali, all these people like talking to this little boy, teaching him things, right? And it's basically like the little boy is like what would become Watson or whatever. But in there, I forget the actress's name, but she's one of the shortcuts, and she tells the little boy, timing is everything. Basically, nothing else matters. And for some reason, sitting in Adobe's offices, seeing Raven start a company before my eyes, and Chris and everybody starting a company, and getting in that fury, and thinking about kind of the old bull versus the young bull, and all these different lessons that are swirling around in my head, and knowing I want to be an entrepreneur, and most importantly, knowing myself, I decide to bow out of the book project, which I was shooting for, to not start the blog, and to not join any iPhone company or to start one. But instead, to stay at BMC, stay associated with the camp for a couple of years, and wait. Because that scene in that little clip, timing is everything, popped into my head. It was an epiphany for me. I was like, when I joined that startup in 2000, how much of what made it go wrong was the fact that everything crashed the month after it got going? Or how much of the bullshit could have been corrected if it hadn't have crashed, right? how much of it would have been better if I would have had waited 2 years, taken some big bonuses at IBM, and had a nest egg, right? So what did timing play in that? And then I thought about what Mike and I did, because we proposed countermeasures on the internet, and everybody was super up in arms. And now it's 2019, and people are like, there might need to be some repercussive effect on the other side before all this cybercrime starts. And we have white papers you can go Google on the rules of information warfare from 2004. So was that company a bad idea, or was it an idea at the wrong time, right?
Right.
So thinking about this, I went and I talked to a mentor of mine, and I said, everybody's starting an app company. And I really feel, I see this app economy thing coming, and I really want to do this. But I just feel like maybe I'm not ready, like the timing thing. And I show him this commercial. He goes, oh, that's just the creepiest thing I've ever seen. It's super creepy. You have to go watch it. and then he says to me, he goes, well, you've really learned a lesson I tried to teach you, which is like, know yourself, what your limitations are. And the timing is everything. He's like, I totally agree. Timing and luck, 2 things startup needs the most. He goes, but have you thought about observation? Have you thought about what is going to happen in the market? There's going to be some people that get out early and their first to market win. But he goes, what's your thought on first to market? Go think about that and come back and see me. And I thought about it. My answer was, first to market is another entrepreneurial myth. It doesn't matter. First to market is like the myth of the patent system. There are multiple ways to protect an idea, trademarks, copyrights, trade secret, right? Like the kernel doesn't patent the recipe because it gives you a way to reverse engineer what the recipe is, right? So I was thinking about all these things, and I was like, wait a second. What advantage do I have if I just take notes for the next 2 years on who's working on what project and what they built and I start a company with 2 years
of observation.
And that was Chaotic Moon. And I went to Mike and I said, I'm going to start this company. And Mike wanted to join. And we met Ben Lamb at the South by in 2009 in March. I was like, well, I met this guy earlier, and he can sell anything to anybody. And he's a funny little guy, and he's awesome. I just saw him at CES. And the 3 of us came together. And I was like, so here's what I've got. I've got credibility from doing the iPhone dev camps forever. I've got this community and building stuff. I've got this thing at South by. We can take all of this and then the enterprise relationships from all the companies I met at IBM and BMC and everywhere, and we can go to them and say, we can build your mobile strategy, your mobile apps, your mobile whatever. And I built this relationship with Apple, right? So I've had all this stuff going on. That was where I learned this is how you build a startup. You don't get an idea and quit your job and start a company. You get an idea and you don't tell your job, and you stay there for a year or 2 and you build it up until it's somewhat solid, and then you go test it, and then when it looks like it's like almost ready to go, then you've boiled the majority of the risk out of your idea. And so from there, I started this policy of always knowing what my next 3 startups are, 3 to 5. And then when I have an event where I cash out or I make money, I take about $250,000 and I invest it in that idea. And I get the domain names and I get the stuff. And so
I've watched this happen now for several
years, right?
For several years.
And
this is true.
Right. So it's like when I was at
there's a future robotics company.
Yeah, mostly robot. I already own the domains. I already have the name. Right. I've got all this stuff. Right. There's a biotech company. I don't want to say the name of it. It's super cool. But right. But you lay these out. And I learned this from Mike, because Chaotic Moon, the secret is nobody knows, was actually formed back in 2004 when he picked me up from the airport when I moved back from Vegas. And he was like, we're going to do a company one day. And he goes, here's the thing. I always structurally plan these things out in advance. We should come up with a name and form a shell company, and I'll keep it going. And then when we start the company, you'll have like 10 years of credit history and 10 years of everything. And he goes, and it takes nothing. I'll just do this. Mike is a master at business structure and legalities and entities. I mean, he's a genius. And he was wearing this shirt with the moon with a pistol shooting the sun. It's like crescent moon. And he goes, so what we'll do, I said, well, I don't know, what do we call it? And he goes, well, let's pick out a word for each of us. He goes, I'll pick out a word for you, chaotic. And that was a word. And he goes, you pick out a word. And like 10 minutes later, he was like, you pick out a word. And there was this woman I went on to do a movie with that I really love. We dated for a while, Erin Gailey. She's an amazing, amazing person who was sitting over in the corner of this place. And I was like really wanting to talk to her. And I talked to Mike about a business. We were at Spider House here in Austin. And I was like, I just looked at his shirt and I go, moon. And he goes, chaotic moon, done. And just because Mike doesn't even care. Our personal fund is called Prismatic Sun. It's just random words. It doesn't really matter what it's called. Like, branding out the window. And so when we went to start the mobile company, he was like, we already have a company. It's like, we can turn this on. It's got everything. So then when the enterprises went to look at us to do business with versus a competitor, you had a company that was formed in the last 2 years or in the last 6 months, and you had a company that had 10 years of operations history that hadn't done anything, but like structurally had all this stuff and looked.
Yeah, here's our operating agreement signed in 10 years ago.
Correct. And they were like, oh yeah, we can spend money with that company. And it just
in a sense, that's what we did with Emergent Order, because I was working at Spike, and I would occasionally get these little side hustle projects, and I created an LLC called the Productioneers in October of 2007. And when after a year of, I kind of unbeknownst sort of followed what you're saying, because we were, while I was at Spike, we did our first big rap video, Fear the Boom and Bust, and then it was another year of doing freelance and like meeting people and like saying like, wow, there's a real need for this kind of work. And then Josh and Lisa and I said, okay, let's do this. But so we renamed the Productioneers Emergent Order and wrote a new operating agreement. But we already had 4 years of operations.
And let's get this straight.
It has come in handy. It's great advice.
I'm not trying to say like I came up with some genius thing. I basically stumbled upon this. But then as I've gotten more mature, as I've done more startups, as I've talked to other founders like yourself, I found out all the people who are successful, this is actually how they do it. I haven't yet to meet somebody who's super successful who's like, I had a job, I quit it, I've yet to meet a person who says, well, I quit my job on Friday, I started a company on Monday, people gave me money, things worked out, I was rich. Everybody I meet that's what I'd call like a really solid entrepreneur is like, was working somewhere and had this thing on the side, and then I ran it for like a year or 2 years or whatever, and then when I started I had 4 years, 10 years, 5 years.
It's like the clutch and the gas. You're easing off the clutch as you're starting to give it gas, and there's a change point, but it's a subtle one.
That's exactly right. And so again, not trying to be like, oh, I'm some entrepreneurial genius, I didn't come up with this. It happened to be what we did, what I did when I did Chaotic Moon. And it worked. We made millions of dollars in the first year. We launched at South by in March, and we made millions and millions. And our competitors had been working for 3 years, and we're still doing like $2 million a year in revenue. And we blew past everybody. And all I did was what my mentor had told me: observation. I was like, oh, notes. Coming in prepared to the game late, actually, super huge advantage, right? So I thought, well, how can I do that? And but have it be closer to timing, right? So I said, I'm interested in finance and biohacking and quantum computing and robotics, and I made a list of like 15 things that sounded interesting, and I picked a couple of them, and I bought domains and I bought stuff and I started doing it. And so the only one that I didn't have the domain and stuff for was I didn't own Honest Dollar. That came at an epiphany when I was sitting at breakfast with Henry, and I went to honestdollar.com, and it said, you can buy this domain now for $600, and I was like, fucking done. but I had another fintech name already that wasn't as cool, and likewise I was going to use Strangeworks for something else. I owned the domain and everything, but my original quantum computing company was going to be called Unusual Bit, right? Because it's kind of clever. But I like Strangeworks way better as a domain, and I have bigger plans for this company. But all of those things are iterative. So
just to overview, you've got Chaotic. You start Chaotic what year? 2010.
South by Southwest 2010.
And if I remember correctly, one of your big hits was the iPad app, the Daily, which it's funny because when the iPad came out, I was working at Spike. One of my former colleagues at Nickelodeon had actually been hired because I was in New York to go work as a content producer on this new iPad only publication, the Daily. Yep. And it's just so funny that you're because so I had kind of a front row seat to the content side.
It was awesome.
You have to tell the story of the pitch for the Daily.
Well, it wasn't it wasn't a pitch. There's this guy Brian Alvey. You should all go look him up. He has a super cool new media company he's doing. He's called Clipisode, I think, or maybe I just said the completely wrong name of his company. Sorry, Brian. I don't know why it's not coming to me, but
no, it's it. It's Clipisode.
Is it? Okay, good. I got it. But he's a super cool guy. So I got invited to a VC who will go unnamed, like private thing, and we got to do a couple of activities. One of them was horseback riding. We're all horseback riding.
And this is you and Ben and Mike.
No, me.
Okay.
And nobody.
Okay.
But we have the company started at this time, and the lady's asking, would you sign here your waiver? Would you like a helmet? No. Would you like a helmet? No. She asked me, would you like a helmet? I say, yeah. So I turn around and people are up on the horses. I'm one of the only people with a helmet. And these guys are kind of looking at me funny. I'm like, look, I don't know a lot, but I know if you're ever asked, would you like a helmet? Somewhere before you, someone really, really needed one. So maybe take the helmet, just surprise. And then people got off and they got a helmet. But I meet Brian and we're kind of talking, and I kind of got in this situation where I made fun of the VC. The VC hated it. The VC would just never invite him again, just asked me to leave pretty much at the end of it. It was like, could you just go ahead and leave now? You're saying all these things about being an entrepreneur and not taking money, and just get out of here. This is not how our business works. But Brian was secretly working for Rupert Murdoch and Steve Jobs on the Daily, and there was no app. But everybody was talking about the app coming. And he was like, I don't know, but I recently met this crazy person. So, we get these calls, and, Ben, is like, somebody's calling. They say they're working for Rupert Murdoch or something. I don't know. I just keep hanging up on him or whatever. Maybe it's Rupert. Who knows, right? And I'm like, what are you doing? And he's like, I don't know. They're just leaving these messages. I was like, well, call them back. And we ended up going to New York, and we had the perfect pitch. Was because at Chaotic Moon we found out the best thing to do was take a bunch of money off the table early. It's good for us, good for the customer if we do a discovery phase. We say, you know what? We're going to come in, you're going to pay us a little bit of money or a lot of money, and we're going to figure out what all the problems are, and we're going to lay out a path and a plan, and even if you don't ever talk to us again, we're going to have given you some value. Everybody loved it. It was great, and that was our original pitch.
So this is who's in this pitch meeting?
So
Rupert Murdoch.
It was Jesse Angelo, Rupert Murdoch, all the it was all the people
Was Jobs in this room for this?
No, he's on the phone all the time. At this point, he's sick, right? So he's on the phone all the time. And we did do a bake-off. Would kill me if I didn't say this. We did do a bake-off against Apple's design team, and we did. He did like our stuff better. So just for the record. But Ben McCraw and Jamie Liu and Brian and the design team we had that Ben had put together was bar none. They're incredible. So there's no shock at that. But basically we're leaving, and because we're like, here's what you can do. And Steve Smith, my longtime friend from Apple, was there with us, and it was me and Ben and Steve on site, and Ben McCraw and a couple people. Well, Ben McCraw wasn't quite there yet. Brian Simpson was there. Anyway, we're all there, and we're leaving, and Rupert's kind of like, where are you going? You're building it, right? And we're just like, we would have to build this whole thing in record, the biggest project ever in record time with all of this. And at
this point, did you even have clients yet? I mean, you had some.
Oh, yeah,
but you were a small company.
We were a small company. We'd done a couple of original things. We had some clients, but Ben negotiated this deal for us to get very handsomely paid to get to stay at places in New York, in Manhattan, and do stuff. And we did the Daily, and it was way ahead of its time, and I always was like,
it was a resource hog. No.
Of course it was. look at what.
Yeah, iPad 1.0 wasn't quite up to the challenge.
No, it was not. And very famously, the demo crashed when they were giving it live on stage, and it was like, of course it crashed. You're trying to take the one of the things they wanted, just the images alone. They had these cameras that were like the red cameras of the day, and it was like you're trying to pump like 40 of those videos into one app on top of like 3D rendering crazy.
Yeah.
It was incredible.
It was a super crazy interface at the time.
The best part of the daily, the only story, I mean, I don't want to tell a lot of daily stories because that was some of the greatest times ever. And I love Jesse to death. And I met so many people there. David Brinker, who's now at Snap, and I'm still friends with like a whole lot of these people. Mike Cronin, who works at the Austin Business Journal, was one of the reporters at the Daily. Like years back, I saw him a couple of years ago at South by. He's like, "Really?" I'm like, "Mike," I'm like, "What are you doing here?" He's like, "Oh, I work in Austin for the Business Journal. What are you doing here?" It's like, I've never left.
This is where I live. This is my home.
But there's so many good people, and there's so many stories, and people always want to tell these stories and out this stuff. There's only one story to tell about the Daily. Only one. And that is, we're working hard. It's supposed to come out at any time. The Super Bowl, it's Super Bowl Sunday. And we're working, and Rupert has an announcement, and they put this big TV in the blank floor that was at this point. We moved up to a floor in the News Corp building that they're turning into like the floor for the Daily, and half of it was still blank. We put this big TV
so you're
there.
doing all this dev in New York.
Oh,
it's
yeah, this is crazy.
We have bought you for the next 9 months.
And it was 3. But yes,
we have bought
this
you,
big TV.
and then here's
you're
your
gonna take,
coffins.
You're gonna
that
take
we'll leave right
9.
alongside.
You're gonna take 9 months and
just sleep in a coffin.
Condense it. But then he has this announcement. It was great, and it was like, I had something made for us. It's awesome. Okay, because they just released, and Will.i.am and the Black Eyed Peas, I think, were playing that year, and they're on stage. I remember that because Will is now a friend, and we met him later, and it was weird. It was all these things like weirdly tied together, and they're playing, and they stop, and there's a commercial, and it's another Super Bowl commercial, and then starts the Ramones playing, It's a Wonderful World, and it's like, America, get ready to meet the Daily, and it's like the iPad rising out of the ocean,
like a monolith.
Cliff.
Yeah,
and it's like,
I remember this ad.
Skies of blue, yeah, and then and when it shows the sports, the iPad's laying down like a 3D stadium, builds up on top of the iPad, and opens up, and all, and it was just like, it was
overpromise much.
It was incredible. It was fucking phenomenal. And Steve Smith, who I love, one of my best friends, who was helping leading engineering, goes, "Well, that completely missets expectations." Just walks off. And then I'm like, we just had an app. Think about this. An app we just built had a Super Bowl commercial designed by the people that did the NFL. And don't get me wrong, it definitely, like at the end, this guy's sitting on a park bench and the bits just stream out of the sky and he's instantly flipping back and forth
with no latency. It's
with
super
zero
smooth.
I mean, it was amazing. But I was like still stuck in like, we just had an app we built in a Super Bowl commercial.
Yeah, that's amazing. That must have been an amazing feeling.
Wow. Yeah, we went on drinks that night and we were like, oh yeah, this is gonna be horrible trying to live up to these expectations. But again, it was in the Super Bowl. The only thing is, like, if it could have just had our logo in it anywhere, that would have been just amazing. But of course, that was, between Steve and Rupert, not going to happen. But I mean, Chaotic was great, and it set up a bunch of stuff, and it set up our first funds. Mike started SLE with Mike and Ben and I. Started the SLE.
So when you say
fund,
funds, you're
like
explain what you
investment
mean.
funds.
Yeah.
So we took all the money. So Chaotic Moon was making all this money, way more than other mobile companies, and everybody's like, "Well, then how come you don't have a Ferrari apartment at the W or whatever?" And it's because Mike was like, "Hey, we're making all this money. Here's what we should do." should form a fund. We started investing in a bunch of these apps, like the game apps and this and that. And eventually Ben led us to invest in teaming up with Andrew Busey and doing this Team Chaos company, which was acquired by Zynga, which is an amazing game company that, financially, never had like a super big hit, but like amazing talent, did just incredible work, made a bunch of great properties. But we had these funds, and we were like, now we're starting to do some investment. And each of us had different ways we were investing in different stuff. And that in 2012 probably. And so take the last 6-7 years, Mike and I have been testing out this stuff, building up to the Ecliptic stuff, right? So it was a pretty interesting path on how Chaotic really became kind of my really first startup that was like, clearly I'm a founder. And that's not to say like my first one was a success. I had the benefit of working at 2 before that were successful, but not commercially, right? Like technology-wise, they were impactful, but it was like this one was definitely on me. I was like, I've started something,
And for people who don't either don't remember what the Daily is or have never heard of Chaotic Moon, I mean, just list some of the apps, some of the big apps that you guys did.
Starbucks and Whole Foods and American Idol and X Factor and Hello Kitty and just
Marvel,
on at Marvel and Disney and on and on and on and on.
Basically, like every major top shelf brand.
It was incredible. And the more we did, the more we got, and it just like just built success.
And you were in the process of selling Chaotic when we met, and I was struck by, and I still am to this day, your approach to pitching, which you've kind of talked about in a way here, like this it's a challenger pitch. You challenge the people you're pitching to in a way that takes a lot of guts.
Yeah, but it does and it doesn't, because I think it's like holding a mirror up to them. It's kind of the reality, right? I don't like bullshit pitches. I don't like that everything's great and it's all amazing, because we all know it's not. Like startups, right? One of the other rules around the whole data not drama principle, which I am turning into a book, is startups are always in one of two phases. They're struggling or they're out of business. And anybody who tells you anything other than those two is lying to your face, right?
Yeah, my buddy Jim Tusty always says it's entrepreneurial terror.
Yeah.
It's like, why is profit a thing? Well, because it's the only way you can justify being scared all the time.
Right, yeah. Yeah. You're always struggling or out of business. Like, I mean, I just did this gig with the Chamber of Commerce here in Austin. They had U-Force from South by Southwest interviewed me, and I was trying to tell everybody in the audience, I'm like, anytime somebody tells you like how great it is and how awesome it is and how everything's going, like if that's what they say, like just know that's what they look like when they are lying to you, because it cannot be. We have sold a company to Accenture, a company to Zynga, a company to Goldman Sachs. We sold other companies to data centers. We sold companies we've invested in. We are not like the greatest entrepreneurs ever people have heard of, but we have done a lot of shit, and we are very successful. And we don't give a shit that nobody's ever heard about us. And we know a lot of shit, and we have a lot of experience, and we have a lot of resources that you don't. And I just started a new company, and I will tell you right now, if you go talk to David Cardona, who has been through several of those and was at Honest Dollar, and who was my COO, he looks terrified every day, because when you start over, sure, maybe getting funding might be a little easier because of our success, okay? I'm not saying there aren't advantages, but it's like the difference between my 22-year-old son's startup, Chilligins, which does due diligence for startups, okay, and Strangeworks, is I'm rich and famous compared to him. And that's about it. Like, we're both struggling to figure out what the next round looks like and how do we get the customer base, where's the print, like everything else is pretty much a shit show. And that's every startup. And I just hate so when you talk about pitching customers, it was like, why are you going to go in and be like, through the power of your brand and with amazing technology, why aren't you just being like, look, we both know that by the time you called us, everything's on here has got to be like, is it on fire? Have you put the fire out? Is it smoldering? Like, what's the situation? And half the time the people would just be like, well, here's the deal. Okay. So we hired this company in India, Canada, Japan, wherever. They did this app. Well, what they didn't know is that we wanted the app in English, but they did the app in like Portuguese, and they shipped the app in the App Store. So everybody, so it's got 1-star ratings, with 5-star ratings. What? It's just horrible. We've got 2 weeks to figure, And by the way, you get those situations. You could also be like, well, unfortunately, that's really expensive. right. But yeah, the pitch was just, the pitch is honesty. The pitch is, why can't you just sit with somebody and be like, look, we have not done that before and we'd love to do it. And there's people that you could get that are going to tell you they've done it before, but they haven't either. And we're a super solid bet and we're going to shoot you straight, and people like that, and I'm doing the same thing with Strangeworks. Quantum computing's not for everybody, and it sucks because I've talked to about 7 customers in the last quarter of the year where I could have gotten money from them, and I didn't. And I'm okay with that. And other people are like, oh, but you could have done this or you could already be doing that. It's like, yeah, to what end? So that 2 years later they can find out that it's not really valuable to them, or it won't be valuable to them for 10 years, and then I'm the asshole that took their money. Why are entrepreneurs so afraid of just being honest with people? They have to have this illusion the company's going great. You know what? The person that's hiring you at the corporation, if you're in a services entrepreneurship, trust me, man, they already know that you're at some shit little startup that isn't making any money. That's why when they called, you showed up the same day or the next day. They know you're desperate for the money. Just be like, hey, we both know that this relationship could really make what I'm doing. It's not going to break me, but it could really make me. Let's talk about how we make that deal happen. Everybody puts on this false bravado, this war paint of entrepreneurship where they're putting out these images. And it's I think it costs everybody a lot of time and a lot of trouble. When you see the heartbreak and the bad stories, you can always trace them back to someone misset the expectations in the beginning.
So put a cap on the Chaotic Moon era, if you will. What marks your exit? I know you've mentioned already that you sold to Accenture, which is a giant consulting firm that does software services and all kinds of stuff.
Look, we grew apart. We all wanted to exit on a high note. It was a cash cow. It was going to be easy to transact to anybody. I left, started thinking about which one of those things in my bags would be next. Ben was CEO. Mike started managing the transaction. We knew it was going to sell, and I just waited for the check to come in. And that's honestly, I did my part during the acquisition, but that, and I'm not trying to say those guys didn't do a lot of work in getting that company acquired, but all the brands, all the money, all that stuff. It wasn't, they weren't selling a failing business, right? That pitch was not super hard. We're this thing that spits off money, has all these brands, owns all these properties, does all this other stuff.
It wasn't like a modern publisher that'll go unnamed. It's I think we might have been a Ponzi scheme all along, but if you buy us, you'll have all these eyeballs.
Right. Yeah, it was a
pick your digital publisher who feels that way right now.
It was a solid thing, and I knew that, and they knew that, and so I stayed on board to help and do that stuff. But I exited daily responsibilities at the business, and I moved on. And I needed to know how much of the success was driven by me, and how much of it was those guys. And the reality is, you couldn't have done it without the three of us. And people always ask us, do you hate each other? Do you this? Do you that? There's all these rumors out there. And the fact is we don't agree on a lot of stuff. I'm in a fun with Mike now. I've known him for almost 30 years and will continue to work with him for 30 more years. And Ben and I just hung out at CES, but we were joking about it because it was somebody asked him, well, would you go back and do it all again if you had a time machine? And the answer from all of us is, fuck yes. It was amazing. We would do the daily again. We would do the company. We'd do all of it again. It was incredible. And it made all of us, phenomenally independently wealthy, and gave us all an incredible entrepreneurial story and tons of contract. Yes. Everything we could have collected, if it was Minecraft, we had hundreds of thousands of everythings to build and turn and make. It was incredible.
So we meet in, I think it's 2013 or 2014. I
Still
can't
going
remember.
at that point. Yeah, 2014 is when I start the kind of stepping out.
I'll start off our story a little bit, which is I implausibly am invited to an event at Peter Thiel's house, who I don't have any I don't know him. Somebody that worked with Peter Thiel appeared in our second rap video, Jim O'Neill, who we both know. And
who's awesome.
Who's a great
but
guy.
has yet to call me back. And I'm just going to call him out in case he listens to this and be like, he never calls
and
me back.
you met Jim like totally independently and of us. It was like, oh my God.
Through, ironically, Brian Behlendorf.
So I get an email from Peter Thiel, which seems like a weird thing to get, like saying, I'm having this event about technology and regulation hosted by the Federalist Society. And my immediate thought is, I assume Jim wrote this email and gave it to Peter to send to me and to the, because why am I even being invited to this? I'm like a court jester who made a goofy rap video and is being brought to this thing. I mean, I'm an econ nerd, so it was fun and interesting, but it was like totally a bizarre thing for me to be at. We're there at Peter's house for 2 days talking. I mean, it's like Antonin Scalia's son is there. All these amazing people are there. And I come back. I'm getting on the airplane. It's a Virgin flight to Austin. And, our company is very young. I'm like just as scared then as I am now about staying alive, which is what we always are all the time as entrepreneurs. And I notice on my ticket that it's like 1D or 2D or something. And I'm like, oh, that's a very low number. Like, because I'm not flying first class ever. So it was like, oh, I wonder if Virgin, oh, wait a second. I didn't book these flights. Peter's people did.
Yeah.
Well, that's pretty awesome. So I sit down and here's this guy sitting next to me that's looks like the ultimate eclectic hipster with this big beard. And he's working on like a website with his own face on the and I'm like, well, I'm pretty sure I'm sitting next to somebody interesting.
We start talking, and I had just come back from keynoting the Canadian Financial Forum, which I should have never done, in where I was talking to a bunch of financiers about funding stuff and trying to put it in the lens of a startup as best I could, and telling jokes that were bombing, using clips. I used a clip from South Park where they go to the bank. Have you seen that one? And
is this the one with the chicken getting head cut
no,
off in the back?
The kid goes to the bank. It's like, my dad says I should open an account. He goes, that's great. We can take that money and put it to work and it's gone.
And it's gone. I remember.
He's like, what? He's like, your money, it's all gone. You invested it and did the stuff, and it's didn't work out. He's like, wait, what? And he's like, next. And then I played another clip, was National Lampoon's Vegas Vacation, where I'm like, this is you guys going to your LPs, and it's when Chevy Chase goes to ATM. He's like, and the money's coming out, and then he takes it to the table, and the guy's like, why don't you just give me the money? We'll go out back. I'll kick in the nuts. We'll call it a day. And it's like, and that's most of the startups you invest in, right? And nobody,
they loved those clips.
Nobody's laughing at any of it. I have these for a whole hour, right? But we met, and I just found it ironic that I, as somebody in tech, should have been at something with Peter Thiel, and you should have been with all of these people. Your video would have been a huge hit in that room,
right?
As opposed to the video clips I had picked, which were apparently
I still would have been a hack non-economist, but I would have sounded a little closer.
as one reviewer said, demeaning and unnecessary. Battery of my profession, I think, was what they said. I'll never forget that.
So, and it's funny because we started off this conversation talking about how you got to be known as Whurley. And at the time, a lot of our conversation was about this question of branding, and you were thinking about where you're headed next, and you're saying, I'm trying to figure out my personal brand.
No, it was really funny because I found out that you did all this stuff, and I was like, maybe this guy can give me some advice. I was like, yeah, there's this thing. It's like not a brand. I haven't really done it, but then like I'm playing with it. And I ended up not doing it, right? I mean, I had built this whole thing and it's like, yeah, no, forget it.
Yeah, so I get off the plane, I come back, and I'm like, I met this really cool guy, and I think maybe we can do some business. And then it was like, and then we were just fast friends after that.
Yeah, we were instant BFFs, and have been working together on all manner of crazy stuff since.
So I got to have a front row seat at the earliest stages of the conversations about what became Honest Dollar.
Yes, which was the best. I mean, it wasn't the best. Each one of these startups I've done, which I really consider being a part of all of them. I count all of them. But if you really want to start, it's like, what have you done as a founder? Like, what have you actually, like, you came up with ideas, you did this stuff. It starts with Chaotic Moon. A couple things spin off of that, but really moves to Honest Dollar, where I say, I need to know if it's me, right? I need to know if this is me or have I really now?
It's your post Beatles. Okay, can I be Paul McCartney without the Beatles?
Right. It is. It is. Is this sustainable, or do I need to go running back to those guys or find some other guys and gals or figure it out or what? Because that is a drug. That's success. You're like, this is great. Like, nobody knows who we are, but we're kind of like rock stars. We got like a cult following, so we can still go and eat. But it was like, there were so many great things. And you're like, I need to figure that out. But the main thing,
nobody knows who you are, but very few people have the President of the United States shout you out, but by your weird techie handle,
right? But the main thing that I got at Chaotic Moon was I got all the money, and early on I got rid of a lot of the money and gave a lot of it to charity because here was the deal. Growing up, without a lot of means, the means always seemed like the thing, and then I had it, and I found like, that doesn't really make me happy. I'm not motivated by the house or the car or the thing or the whatever, or even the experiences. Like the millennials, they all spend all the money on experiences. The money just doesn't, it's just a thing. It's just like my computer. I don't play games on my computers because to me, computers are like hammers and screwdrivers. It's a tool. It's like, I don't know, do you play games with your, electrician's kit? You don't? Okay, then why are you, I had this electrician at my house. He's like, oh, what games you got on there? And he was all freaked out that, like, offended that I didn't have, like, some Fortnite or something on my computer. And it was like, well, this is a tool for me. Like, do you play games with this stuff on your belt? And he's like, no, that's dumb. And it's like, yeah, that's kind of how I feel about it. But what I learned at Chaotic Moon was a super good lesson. It was a company for fun and profit. And the narrative arc is, starts company for fun and profit. It was all models and bottles. It was great. Got rid of all the money. Made it all back tenfold. I mean, I didn't get rid of it. I mean, charities and stuff. But it didn't do anything. It did nothing for me. It didn't motivate me to make more money. It depressed me. It was like, it was almost a burden, right? And people who are entrepreneurs who really want money are like, "Oh, give me that burden." Or it's real easy.
Yeah, that's a burden. I'll carry your burden for you.
Yeah, but you don't. Everybody's different. If I was a different person, I might be like, "This is the greatest thing ever. I'm rich." Right? That's not what motivates me. I loved the creation of the stuff. I loved doing stuff. I loved so many parts about it. The money was a byproduct, and it became a byproduct that became a problem. Because it literally is more money, more problems. It's like now you have people calling you about like, hey, you have all these K1s and you have these other things. And like literally at the time it's like, what the fuck is a K1? Like, what is this thing? What are these things? And it was like kind of this overnight success had brought with it a ton of stress, and it was like, I don't really care that I don't own a Ferrari. Or that I live in a condo downtown. I don't really give a shit. I'm fine. Like, so I don't really need any of this mess. But Chaotic Moon was fun and profit. And so when I went to Honest Dollar, the goal was, let's be the hero. Let me start a business where I'm going to change the world and make it for a better place. And there's no bigger place that needs changing than a financial system, right? Which is completely structured to keep rich people rich and poor people poor.
Well, I wouldn't agree with that.
No, I say it purposely knowing you don't agree with it. Sorry. So at this point, maybe somebody's like, now I'm listening. But they just woke up. Somebody's like, what? But what I mean is like, look, certain areas, when you look at like payday loans and things like this, there are things that are just egregious, right?
I don't agree with that either.
I know, but they are. But they are because we don't.
I think that the reality is that finance is very complicated. It's also wildly, crazily, irrationally regulated by an alphabet soup of organizations that like have turf wars over whose jurisdiction it is. Is this the SEC or the CFPB or the there's this. So you have. It is an industry that's got a lot of problems, but they're not problems that are the result of the nature of finance. Finance is just a business like any other. The people that work in finance are people just like anybody else.
Okay, so
it's sort of like healthcare and education. Let me
distinguish between finance and when I say financial system, that's the wrong way to describe it. There are components that have emerged within that system that absolutely are rigged, and this isn't because of regulation or because of anything. This is just like, payday loans is a great example, right? Payday loans. Here's my problem with payday loans. It's not actually with the I hate them. I don't like the payday loans. I hate that we've done such a poor job of educating people in this country that people used to get paid monthly, and then they got paid every 2 weeks, and now they get paid every week, and people still can't manage their money for a week, and that just scares the shit out of me. That freaks me out. And then it makes me depressed that there are people that are like, people can't manage money for more than a week. I can take advantage of that to the tune that they do.
Fair either, right?
28%, 36%. That's a lot. I mean, those are things structured that people can't pay it back, right? Arguably.
It's very interesting. We don't have to go down too much of a rabbit hole. All I'll say is that if you're,
but it's you, so I threw it out.
Yes. Well, so I mean, like, look, I'm not some expert on payday loans. Here's what I know. I know that interest rates exist for a couple different reasons, and one of them is to price risk. So if you are going to lend to a group of people who, whether through fault of their own or no fault of their own, have a very high rate of defaulting on your loans, the only way you can continue to exist as an entrepreneur trying to help those people by giving them the money they need at the time that they need it is set the interest rate high enough that you can offset all the people who turn around and say, I'm sorry, I don't have it.
Right.
And so the alternative to that is loan sharks who are in a black market. And so we have this a kind of like, it's sort of like sweatshops, right? So who likes sweatshops? Nobody likes. Why would anybody like sweatshops?
I think we could name several clothing brands.
Well, at a human level, the notion of somebody working literal sweatshop is horrible. But like Paul Krugman, this before he kind of got a little nuts, wrote a whole piece saying that sweatshops are great, and here's what he meant by that: provided you're not being chained to your desk and forced to work. The people that are moving from rural areas in China or Bangladesh or, on farms where your kids die, there's almost no job more dangerous and difficult than agriculture, especially impoverished agriculture. They're moving to these sweatshops, not because sweatshops are awesome, but because it's better than the alternative. And unfortunately, in the world, we live in a world of adjacent possibilities. And so I'm saying, like, the people that like to attack payday lending, this is my warning to you, my friend. People like politicians who like to say, "Look at these high interest rates." It's like, well, it's an interest rate for a week, and you're looking at the annual rate, so that's not even fair. But they are pretending there's this alternative where we can just magically erase risk, and of course, there's never any blame for people who default. The reality is we have to like, should we ban things that are provided? It's a weird thing in finance in particular.
It's totally is. So
the products for poor people are always being banned.
So here's the thing.
Like, what do you think they're going to do now? They're going to go to loan sharks.
So here's the thing.
Terrible scenario.
So here's the thing. So
we've gone down a rabbit hole.
No, we haven't. Actually, we've gone to exactly why I created Honest Dollar, which is I actually disagree. I think that those products are engineered horribly. I feel that I have personally, growing up as a young person, been somewhat victimized by some of those. So there's definitely some emotional slant to that. I also feel that there's stupidity in some of these regulations. For example, Uber workers should be W-2 employees instead of 1099s because they'll get benefits. Well, wait a second. W-2 employees still pay for their fucking benefits. Why is that not a free market? I offer something to 1099s that's competitively priced in benefits. So taking this kind of like not liking the payday loans, for right or wrong, taking this kind of what was going on in the legislative system and all, we said we can build something better as entrepreneurs. We can do what entrepreneurs do. We can solve a problem that addresses this regulatory concern, that helps these people out of this thing we don't like, right? That gives them a better alternative, that educates them, right? And we said, what if the person that works at the tire shop that goes to the bar every Friday, what if we learn that behavior? We could just give them a notification and say, looks like you're going to the bar again. Now, every time you do, you think you're going to spend $20, you spend $200. But if you get a 6-pack of Netflix tonight, here's where we could redo that money. And just give them the choice. They can still make the wrong choice. We're not trying to behaviorally change anything. We're just making them aware. And what we found in some quick A/B testing is some people will make what we would say is the right choice, which is wrong of us to say. It's not our choice to make, okay? And some people would continue down that line of behavior. And that's fine. But you could surface information because there are some people that when we went out and talked to people and said, look, I could show you this about your finance, they'd be like, well, I never thought about that before. I don't understand how compound interest works. I don't understand. Nobody's ever educated me. And you'd be surprised at how quickly they could, because people think that poor people have credit cards that are moving money from credit card to do all this stuff. They're like, oh, they're horrible with finance. Actually, if you look at the way some of them are bouncing that around, they're kind of financial geniuses, right? Like there's some people that are like,
yeah, I've never understood this idea that because somebody doesn't have a high income, they necessarily must be somehow
financially illiterate, right? Like I disagree with that completely. So we took all of this and we rolled it in and we said, what can we do? Well, where are the majority of these people? They're either self-employed, they work at a small business, or they're in this new class of 1099 type contract
sort of
workers.
Gig economy, yeah.
The gig economy that was coming up at the time, right? I said, what could we do? And what we said is, well, why don't small businesses offer benefits? Why don't they offer a 401k package? So we did some investigation. What we found out is, pretty much all your 401k programs are complete ripoffs. And I don't mind saying that. Like, they are. I can demonstrably prove that. If you have a 401k, I can show you where that is not where you should be putting money.
Well, and what a lot of people I think don't even realize is that why does 401k have the name 401k? It's because it's a weird tax code loophole
that the guy who created is on record as saying, I wish I would have never done that. It's become a monster. It's fucking horrible for people. Like the person who created it thinks it's horrible. So we said, okay, well, if the 401k system's bad, well, is that why small businesses don't offer them? No, small businesses don't offer them because there's this thing called the 401k averages book the industry depends on, okay? And it says, John and I have a business and we have 8 employees and we have $100,000 in assets among us. And it says, so that's $10,000 each and this is what we do. Okay, and it tells you how you can do all the kind of, but that's not the reality. The reality is John and I have $95,000 and our 8 employees have $5,000 among them. And if we offered a 401k program, we're essentially going to subsidize their savings out of our money, but we're smart entrepreneurs, so we're not going to do that. And so small businesses don't offer plans for the most part. And there's different things you can do where people glom on and they do these shared plans and all this other stuff, but it's an ineffective system. We said, but there is this thing called the IRA. And if you look back to that original law, when it came in against, it's not called the 401k law, it's called the 401k and IRA. And these things were created at the same time. There's different kind of IRAs. There's SEP IRAs and there's Roth IRAs and there's all. And we said, why don't people use them? Well, they're individual accounts and they're post-tax and there's all this. And this whole pre-tax thing is a stupid illusion anyway. And the government's looking at taxing your 401k anyway now, right? So there's this whole illusion of like you're somehow saving money pre-tax and there's all these benefits. And you could argue at it, but look, it's all eaten up in fees. It doesn't matter anyway. You'd be better off just saving the money and controlling it yourself is what we decided. So we set up these IRAs. We said we could do the know your customer laws all digitally. We could do power of attorney digitally, to take assets from other things where it wasn't being effectively managed. We could do all these things. We made an app where you pull the app out. You're an Uber or Lyft driver. We did a big deal with Lyft. You take a photo of your license. We suck everything in. 30 seconds later, you have an account. But here's the catch. We invested everything in Vanguard funds, really respected funds, but you need $25,000 as a minimum to invest. So we said, what if we made these products designed for basically rich people available to basically poor people, where they could invest just $1 in a Vanguard fund, right? And did this, fractionalized it and built our own order management system and all this stuff. And then we did it in our areas. And then we did a know your customer thing where we really knew him. We said, John is not great at managing money, but what we can do is we can get him to save a little bit, and we can put it in a Roth IRA. So it's post-tax, and there's not going to be any penalty if he pulls the principal, right? And so if he has that flat tire, instead of going to that payday guy where the $100 loan is going to cost him $200 over the course of 6 months or some crazy bullshit, he could just pull that money out. And if we allowed him to do that, would John save more? If he knew he could get it, instead of throwing it over a fence and having to make a dozen calls, if he could just click a button and the money comes right back, would he be more prone to save that money? And what we proved is, yes, that we could build an alternative system based on existing laws, based on all, and there's no doubt we were using those things in an advantageous way they hadn't been done before.
Right.
But using that regulatory system to combat these different things, and
just getting all the friction out of it. It's like
a
one click financial plan.
And being like, look, you don't know, all you need to do is, it's like, kind of when you get that advice when people are like, yeah, it's called compound interest, you should try just saving, right? Like sometimes it's Occam's razor. The simplest solution is the best. It's like, if we could just get him to put away $1, we could maybe get him to put away 5. And we get him to put away 5, maybe 10. 10 is 100. 100 is 200, right? And there were plenty of cases where somebody put $300, $400 away, took $300 out, but over the course of the next 4 months, they'd save up $600, right? This is what we were trying to do. And then, of course, when it got acquired by Goldman Sachs, which was unexpected to everybody, Goldman Sachs didn't plan on, we didn't plan, nobody. That was on its 1-year anniversary. I went on CNBC to announce this, right? Which is a phenomenal entrepreneurial story. The real story was I learned that I had a business for fun and profit. Now I have a business to make the world better, and you don't do that as an individual. We needed Goldman Sachs' reputation. They're backing their infrastructure. As soon as we did that, every TurboTax user got access to Honest Dollar, right? Deal with the IEEE. We did all these big things. And
yeah, I always see the Honest Dollar ads in my mint.com. It's like always.
Right. All of these things happen because startups and changing the world are very similar in one aspect. Those are team sports. They're not individual endeavors. You know what I mean? It takes a community. It takes a team. And so it was an amazing story. But I learned this lesson. So at the first one I learned, making all the money doesn't really make me happy. And the second one I learned, I'm probably never going to be the hero entrepreneur. And so now at the new company, I'm like, what is a technology that has the ability to change the world, that has the ability to dramatically impact the human condition in a positive way, that needs to be democratized so millions of really creative geniuses have access to it? And that's kind of my approach to Strangeworks, is graduating from fun and profit to kind of trying to change the world and be a hero, and graduating from that to what I really need to be is a catalyst. So can I build a company that's successful entrepreneurially, that empowers a bunch of other people to do really crazy, amazing things?
What is Strangeworks? And I remember when it was just all right, I'm exiting from Goldman and I've started up this thing, and here's a cool logo because you're fantastic branding. You're just a natural branding guy. So it's like you're always like, you've got the logo and you've got all the stuff in place before what it's going to be sometimes.
And I owe that, Chris Boyles and Ed Temple, who were at Chaotic and were at Honest Dollar as well. I called those guys and I spent 9 months going through logos, and Chris got frustrated because I was like, it could be this type of company or that type of company, and it changed several times. But those guys did that particular work, and at Chaotic, Ben McCraw, and Brian and them did that, I know the right people, so I know it. But just to be clear, I'm not like drawing. I'm not an artist, right?
No, but there's I would say this to, my wife Lisa was a producer at Nickelodeon, and one year she had half of all of the Broadcast Design Award nominations. And she said, am I just like a hack because I don't know how to edit and I don't know how to do any of these things? And I said, well, you have access to the same resources of all the other producers at Nick. It's, how to pick great people. She made some of the best hires. She's made some of the best hires at Emergent Order. She made amazing hires at Nickelodeon, people that left Nickelodeon and started successful companies. I said, you have great taste and you know great people. It's like, that's what's more important than that. Okay, you can't draw, you can't edit. I think because I'm very much like a craftsman, so she would look at me editing my own stuff and be like, well, you actually know how to do the thing. It's like, that's one skill, but being able to assemble an unbelievable team is frankly in a lot of respects kind of the more important skill if you want to build an enterprise, build a company.
Right. Those are all important, but yeah, you got kind of a front row seat in it, and then when I called you and told you like, hey, there's this thing I think is gonna happen, like we went on this trip. I mean, the big my favorite honest dollar moment. I mean, there were so many Goldman moments that were my favorite, because working there was, you're in the belly of the alleged beast, and you're like, it's not a beast at all. There's a bunch of really cool people that work there. And sure, there's a couple assholes like every company, and there's probably people there that are really concerned about their reputation. They really actually want to impact the world. And they do the 10,000 women initiative and the 10,000 small businesses, and there's all these things you never hear about unless you work there. Like, they all know about it. So when they see people talking, about the company is so evil, or it's the giant tentacled whatever, they're like, yes, but then there's all these other things,
Right.
And like they're going through a scandal.
Life's always a lot more complicated than, especially today. People want to reduce things to black and white so that they don't. So I think it's because it's easier then. Then you don't really have to take it seriously. You don't have to listen.
You don't have to think about.
Narrow your view.
You have to think about things that take. Well, you don't have to think, and that's a big problem in society today. Like using your brain. But the thing is my favorite story is I randomly, because we'd been selling some companies and successful, this woman, Allison Rhodes in Dallas, who manages money for Goldman, said, I'd like to meet with you. And, her pitch was like, you should give me all your money and I should manage it for you. And I was like, hellfire and brimstone and honest dollar, and I'm going to wreck retirement, and I'm going to change all the stuff, and then like who knows where it goes from there. And she's looking me up, and I got like a mind control skateboard, and there's like a taser drone, then I did all these apps, and it was very confusing. And she had just been through this class on like learning to spot things that were important for the company, and all this extracurricular stuff. And she called this guy Manju, awesome dude. And she was like, hey, so I met with this guy, and I don't know, but maybe we should look at this. And then Manju kind of reached in, and they're like, would you like to talk to us in New York? And it's like, we're raising a Series A. And I'm like, we're going to go pitch Goldman on the Series A. Okay, that's what's going to happen. So I go up for a day, and I'm talking to them, and they're like, could you wait here a moment? And some more people come in the room, and I'm talking to them, and they're like, yeah, could you come back tomorrow? We'll get you, hotel. It's not a problem. Like, and so then I come back, and then Anthony's in D.C. working on, at the time, all the congressmen and women and senators were like, 1099 workers got to be W-2s, and we were trying to educate them to like, you do realize W-2s pay for all these things you just think they miraculously get for free when they get a job, right?
There's some tree out there that you can pluck from that is
right. So it's like,
if I make it required, the tree becomes available. The tree's there now, and I can pluck from it.
So AB was like, they pay this, but if they're 1099s and they use our service, then they just pay this. And maybe we should move into benefits and other stuff, because there's a way to do this in a free market way that makes sense. And we're proving it's a success, that it's successful. And I'm like, hey man, you're in DC. Can you take the train up to New York? Because it got to a point where they're like, well, financially, we just like, we don't understand your whole, like, this is all very different, right? And I'm like, well, I got a finance guy. And AB is like, don't throw me under the bus again, because very famously, one of our investors, as it came out now, I don't think he'd mind me saying, and incredible person that I like a lot was Vikram Pandit, who ran Citi. And we had this...
Ran Citigroup, the big...
Citigroup. And
one of the biggest banks in the world.
We had a famous meeting where myself and Tom Bishop and I was pitching Vikram, and Tom was talking about tech, and he got to the thing, and he asked me a finance question. I go, I don't fucking know. Anthony's a finance genius. I go, Anthony? And AB was like, did you just throw me under the bus with like Vikram fucking fan? Like, what the fuck? We got in the elevator, and he's just like, hey, like, all finance questions aren't like just, you know, like,
yeah, it's an entire massive.
He goes,
discipline.
I have several licenses and stuff. It doesn't make me an expert in all the finance. Like, maybe, you know, don't like hard line those questions to me. So he didn't want that to be this moment. I was like, oh no, it's good. You know, they know the price. So he comes up, we're pitching him, and we stay another day and we're pitching him. So we're flying back on Virgin, which I'm sad to see go. And we connect from New York. We connect in Dallas, Love Field. And so have a layover. The phone rings. And it's Manju. I said, hello. And he goes, hey, just met the board and everybody, and we talked, and we just you know, we decided we're not going to invest in the Series A, you know, blah, 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 whatever. And I'm like, you know, no harm, no foul, whatever, you know, blah, blah, blah. We disconnected. He calls back. He said, wait. Like, we just want to know, would you be open to selling the entire thing? And of course, I'm like an entrepreneur. So I'm like, well, I mean, as an entrepreneur, I'm always open to that, but there's a lot to discuss. But, you know, what would you, well, if you're open to it, we'd like to move in that direction, whatever. So I hang up and all that, and I look at AB and I go, well, they want to buy the company. And AB says, bullshit.
And at this point, I don't think Goldman Sachs had ever, they don't acquire they're not like a mergers and acquisitions company.
They did acquire something before us. It was General Electric's deposit business.
A small purchase.
Not on the scale. And
but they don't buy startups. They don't like acquihire like Google does.
We were the first one, right? And it wasn't an acquihire, because the first thing that happened is they looked at us. They were like, oh, how many people didn't go to college? Who smokes pot? I know that's Austin. Like, what did they like? People.
What is this ragtag group of pirates?
Right. When we sold, some people were like, some people that were jealous were like, oh, well, it was just an acquihire. That's why they won't say the number. We won't say the number because I found out early on that when you sell a company, the only person that wants to say the number in the press is the entrepreneur. So they can be like, I made all that money. And it's like, you didn't own that much of the company. And so it's like, yeah, it sold for $250 million 7 years later, and you own 10% of that as a management team, and you probably made like $3 million. But they go walking around like they made $250 million. And what I found is having a reputation as an entrepreneur who sells companies who doesn't give a shit, numbers undisclosed, nobody cares, is great. Because you know who disclosing that number is not good for? The person acquiring the company. Because then they're talking to 5 other companies or whatever, and now those companies think they're worth even more or whatever. And so you can, you know, I've built a reputation as like, hey, we're super great. We'll sell you the company. We don't really care about bragging about the numbers. We don't care about anything. And you'd be surprised at what some of the numbers are. But it's awesome to be able to have that kind of relationship. And I plan on selling more companies in the future. So it's great, you know. Are we going to disclose the numbers? No. Now, if the number was like $1 billion, I'm getting ready. I'm getting older. Maybe I'm looking at retirement. Maybe I want to write a book. Maybe it'd be good to add on top of all of these great stories, be like, and sold for $1 billion. Because as we said earlier, somehow $1 billion is a magic number, even though in the world of finance, that number is a rounding error in a lot of things. So anyway, we're set at a Chili's having strawberry margaritas, and he'd be like, Goldman Sachs. And I'm like, yeah, the people we were with in New York. I'm like, those people. He's like, no. He's like, they don't do that. I mean, he comes from finance. He's like, this does not happen. And then we had to be really quiet. We went through months and months of stuff. And then at South by, I hosted President Obama on Friday. And then Saturday and Sunday, we're still working. And late one night, maybe it was Friday night, I can't remember exactly when it was, AB and David are up there. And we have this great video of David looking at every paper. And he goes, I think it's finally done. And then he looks like he's just going to pass out. And then we took a picture of the 3 of us. And they had sent a PR guy down. And he was just sitting there in the room, like doing other stuff, waiting. He's like, all right, this is the plan. Tomorrow morning, you meet me here. This is what happened. And they just immediately jumped in And I was on CNBC the next day getting all of this shit from the reporters who were like, aren't they just going to crush this company? And if you go to honestdollar.com right now today, it's still called Honest Dollar. It says by Goldman Sachs. And, a couple of things have changed, and the tech and this and that, of course, because they have a, whole massive thing that they're doing with consumer and all. But it's like, the funny story entrepreneurially is Accenture bought Chaotic Moon to kind of be cool and hip, and kind of just crushed all of the cool and hip out of it. Okay. And so the company that was like an easy transaction to be successful. And then the evil empire bought the thing that helps poor people, and has done an amazingly great job of staying true to what our mission was and growing it. So it's kind of like weird to have those two stories. But no, it's been, it was
people can't
amazing.
process the cognitive dissonance of that story, though. There's some other, they're slipping the Mickey somehow. You get your SIP IRA, and we've purchased your children for indentured servitude. It's in the user and
it's inevitable. It's inevitable that companies like that will move into consumer, and to do so, they'll have to change their behavior. There's just no way. And you look at companies that are in consumer and haven't changed their behavior, like Wells Fargo. Jesus, how many more things can they fuck up? They're like making customers up and making accounts up and making stuff up. Eventually, these other banks are going to move in that area. And seeing Goldman say, managing money is changing, and this is changing, we're going to go into consumer. You could go read 100 articles about it, right? It's not, it shouldn't be a shock to anyone. And the fact that they're going to have to play by some new rules, that they're going to have to do things differently, that they're going to have to engage social media, something that they haven't really had to do in their business, that they're going to have to do these things. This shouldn't shock, and people should be happy about it. People should be like, there's going to be some more transparency, there's going to be some more accountability, there's more this and that, and maybe they'll do great, and maybe they'll screw something up. But the fact is it's like, it's so easy to hate on all these companies. It's like, now we hate on Apple because they're successful. Now everybody, Apple stock goes down, and everybody's like, the beginning of the end of Apple. And it's like, I have a news flash for you. With $245 billion in cash, and another $20 billion probably coming this quarter, they could probably stop selling shit and still pay everybody for a unbelievably long amount of time.
I'm sure they could work in perpetuity off the interest on the cash. With their current staff,
it's like,
probably.
I love your sensationalist title, but it's like, I don't think they're going anywhere. Now, will the iPhone lose dominance? All those things may happen, but this whole like somehow Apple's going to mysteriously go out of business overnight, it's like, yeah, you're crazy. And by the way, Apple, for all of its faults and complaints, and I gave the example about Tim Cook and Steve Jobs earlier, whatever. I love Steve Jobs. I think he was an amazing leader. I got to work with him twice in my career. Once, very briefly, on a project at R&D, and once, of course, on the Daily. And I think he's everything that everybody said he was, and probably misunderstood. And the anger thing is probably super. Sure, but overplayed. But it's like everything else gets examined and blown up, and Tim Cook, what he's done in hiring Lisa Jackson, and what she's done with their environmental programs, buying forests, taking them to their energy usage, all of these things. As a company, it's still so admirable in so many ways. But hey, the iPhone sales are down a little bit, so let's just all go on and trash them.
Yeah,
They're going out of
funny when
business.
they just released their financials for the fourth quarter, and it's catastrophic. It's their second best quarter in the history of the company. It's a catastrophe.
So they're done.
So we've been going for a long time.
Yeah, we have.
I want just sum up what you're doing right now.
Here's the way computers work now: the iPad, your phone, an HPC cluster, AWS, doesn't matter. All these computers basically calculate what we can do by hand. Okay, they just do it really fast. There's nothing these computers do that we couldn't do on a pen and a paper. It might take us 5 years, but there's nothing that they can do. They're essentially giant abacus. That's it.
Zeros and ones, on-off switches.
Quantum computing will change computing more in the next 10 years then computing has changed in its entirety. And not just quantum computing, a whole class of what I call exotic computing. So quantum and neuromorphic and biological and optical and on and on. But quantum computing is at the forefront of that. And it is, you have problems where you have a few inputs and you add an input and the evaluation time of that problem grows exponentially. Then a computer that took 1,600 seconds to solve it with 14 inputs takes 1,600 years to solve the same problem with 22 inputs, and more than the time of the known universe to solve it with 30 inputs. Okay?
So just to make sure, I'm going to spit some of this stuff back to you to make sure because I still don't really grok it at the end of the day. But it seems like what you're saying is like, look, if you've got complex problems with a lot of variables going into them, the more variables
don't
you
think
add.
of it that way. Think of it this way. Think of the traveling salesperson problem.
So what is that?
We want to send a salesperson to 14 cities, and we want to route them in the most efficient path. It's an optimization problem. It's a classic problem. Some people have argued it's been solved or not solved or whatever. There's all kind of, but use it as a baseline because it is a great example.
And this is like a known kind of computing.
This is a very famous problem. Like anybody you know who's done anything with a computer knows this problem. If you did that on your laptop's probably like 10 to the 9th operations. It's like a 10 to the 11th or 14th, whatever problem. It does it 10 to 11th. It does it in about 1,600 seconds. Poof, there's the path. If you increase the number from 14, the number of cities, to 22, okay? So you've added 8 cities. So that's barely a number, but the evaluation time of that problem goes through the roof exponentially. That same computer takes 1,600 years to optimize that path.
Huh.
Okay? So that's what I say when I say you have a few inputs you've added.
Yeah, that's really counterintuitive.
That's really
counterintuitive because it doesn't seem that much more complicated.
So if you make it 28 cities, that same computer would take longer than the known time of the universe. Okay? It's not that it can't do it. It's that it takes forever to do it. So when people say quantum computers are faster, you hear all this bullshit about quantum supremacy. All the press is explaining it the wrong way. They're making it sound like it's going to make your Visa card transaction faster or replace something in a data center. That's not what it's for. It's faster in the sense of this HPC cluster would take 1,000 years to do it, and this thing could do it in a day or a week or a couple hours. So it's unbelievably faster, but not in the scales people are
and not necessarily for every type of problem.
Definitely not even for every part of a problem. So you take something like Shor's algorithm, which is what you would use to break encryption, right? It's got 5 steps. Is it an odd number? Is it a factor of 2 coprimes? We take a number and pick a random number to divide it by. The 4th step is the only step we would need a quantum computer for, which is the order numbering, right? And then the 5th step, we could send that result back and say, okay, let's check everything. Do we go back at 1 or did we get our answer? So these things shouldn't even be thought of as computers in my mind. They should be thought of like coprocessors, cloud processors, right?
Yeah, like a GPU or like...
That's exactly
If you're an old man, you'd be like, remember when you had the 386 DX that had the floating point processor, coprocessor. So it would be like the quantum coprocessor.
Now, that's not to say that eventually there won't be quantum computers with millions or even potentially 1 billion qubits, and the world will have changed dramatically by then, and it won't be a computer. It's just to say that in their infancy, which they will be in for a while, they should be looked at as coprocessors to solve, and they shouldn't be looked at as solving problems. Everybody that says, I've got a proof where I could do this quantum thing faster on a quantum computer, I could do than it does on a classical thing, right? That's bullshit. These computers aren't meant to solve the problems of today or the problems we have of the past. They're meant to solve problems nobody's even thought of because it's a completely new computing paradigm. It's kind of like the way we're thinking of it today is the way people thought of computers when they first came out, and you had people who wrote finances and ledgers, and people like, well, we could probably do that on a computer. We could keep those same notes.
VisiCalc.
And they weren't thinking about like high frequency trading or quantum Monte Carlos or any of this stuff.
Or 3D graphics and video games.
And that's kind of how we're thinking of quantum computing. Everybody's like, oh, well, we could maybe do this thing faster or whatever. And that's not everybody in the field, but that's the majority of people outside of the field. And some of the people in the field are comparing differently. So the basic premise of Strangeworks, to answer your question succinctly, is we want to democratize and distribute the access to this technology. And we want to help herald this age of quantum computing and bring it faster, bring it in from 20 years to 10 to 3 by making it where businesses can see value, demonstrable value that they can say, we invested X amount into quantum and we got this return on investment. And that's really the focus. And by building a developer community and educating a lot more people and lowering the barrier to entry, you don't have to be a physicist and a chemist and a software developer and also really great at math to program one. You maybe just have to be one or two of those things.
And then you've also got a fund.
And that's simple to explain, right?
So explain that. Explain that.
Mike Irwin has been wanting to do a fund. I said the other night.
So what is a fund? What is this?
So a fund being we're raising money to distribute to startups that we're going to manage. We're going to get our investors a return, right? We've had our own private funds. I think Mike's averaged like 39% IRR on those or something.
What's IRR?
So the rate of return, right? So we've done very well with those. This fund is basically, for me, my way of saying everybody who's always sent me a thing about like, I wish I would have invested in Honest Dollar or Chaotic Moon or this thing, or I would have done this. I now have a thing of saying, hey, great news. You can actually invest in everything I'm invested in. I've started a fund. And by the way, Mike and I are two of the major LPs in the fund. So we've put millions of dollars into this thing. So one, we're not asking to manage your money and not have any skin in the game. And two, you're investing in everything I'm investing in. So great news. All those people that always give me shit could just write a check to the fund and then they're literally in every deal that I'm in. Okay. And every deal that I'm doing is in the fund, right? So we ran it for about the last year and we made several investments. A medical company, we invested in Strangeworks, we invested in a drone company, we invested in a bunch of stuff so that we could come instead of like a lot of funds where they say, well, I used to money manage at JP Morgan or Goldman Sachs or whatever. John, give me your money. I'm going to invest in startups. Here's all this reasons it's all hot. We're like, look, we are the startups and we are operators of startups and we are also investors in startups and we've done it for years and we're now offering that to you and we wanted to boil down the risk. So all the fees are reinvested in the fund. We don't keep those and pocket them. We just want the carry if we're successful. So already our interests are more aligned. And second, we've put in more money probably than you will. So we have more risk in the game. So then our interests, again, are aligned, right? And we have all these points of alignment. It goes on and on and on. And by the way, we actively manage these things the same way we've managed all the startups we've sold. So again, our interests are aligned. So it's really great. It's a different approach. And the fund thesis is simple. Entrepreneurs aren't operators. And if you give your money to an entrepreneur and they lose it, and you come to me and you're like, I gave my money to this entrepreneur and they lost it, I'm going to be like, shock. And by the way, entrepreneurs shouldn't be operators. Entrepreneurs are these amazing, talented, hardworking people that are visionaries in so many ways, and they need to have a support infrastructure put around them so that they can do the thing that they do best. It is not running QuickBooks. I can guarantee it. It is not coming up with the advertising plan. It is not the go-to-market strategy. It is none of those things that we ask them to do. They have the idea and they have the execution. They have the vision. And so what we do is we put an active management system around them when we make an investment. And the other thing we do is we don't invest in a certain vertical or a certain type of startup. We invest in all startups specifically at a moment in time in the maturity of that startup when the alpha is coming in and we can apply the most leverage operationally and management-wise, kind of like a PE firm. To get,
like a what firm?
Like a PE firm. Like a
what
private,
is that?
Like a private equity firm.
Sure. Okay, sure.
To get the best result for us and our investors and the entrepreneurs. And what's great is usually the entrepreneurs aren't doing a whole lot of rounds with us. So the ones we've done in the past before the fund, they've kept more of the company for themselves and they've made more money when it exits. So now they're all coming back with the, like, I've got another idea and you made me rich, so I want to work with you, right? And so what we did a little event the other night to kind of announce it. And we basically had some of the entrepreneurs, not all of them did as great a job because some of them got super nervous. But the basic idea was we're going to have the entrepreneurs that we've invested in step up and be like, why are they working with us? They could take money from anybody. You know, why do they like being managed? Why do they like all of these things? Because they really do, if you talk to them. They really enjoy the fact that, oh my God, I don't have to worry about the finance. I've got somebody who's going to help take care of that. Not do it for them, but who's going to give them a framework, with which to operate. Oh, man, getting things manufactured is freaking hard. I've got someone that has experience that's going to help me with that. That's amazing, right? So it's a different kind. We don't call it venture capital. We call it entrepreneurial capital. Our trademark is, venture beyond capital. Because, Mike's as good at the marketing stuff as I am.
I think this is a great place for us to kind of come to a close, because I think what you've really done is you've gone on this unbelievable journey of learning and starting companies and building teams, and now you're getting to take that and scale it and bring it to so many bring to as many people as you can find who I think fit your criteria.
Well, that's the real challenge, right? The real challenge is this. I left Chaotic Moon to see if it was me, and I know I can do it. So now it's the opposite. I did that to prove to myself, is it me? Am I that talent? Now I'm claiming I have a system, a model. I have a functionality, this method. I've systematized my part of it. And Mike has done this incredible job on systematizing his. So now what we're doing is saying, if that's true, then it can be scaled. And so now it's the opposite. Now I want to see, is it me? Or can I take a group of 20, 50, 70 entrepreneurs and help make them all successful? And I think we can, because the illusion of venture capital is they return 23% on average. Sure, the top half a 0.5%, everybody else loses money, right? And 99 out of 100 startups fail. Why? Right?
Well, part of it's that it's just hard to figure out what's coming next. So
I think
some of that's inherent in the entrepreneurial discovery
process. I think it's all bullshit. I think half of them are horrible ideas, and everybody's afraid to be like, I'm sorry, your baby's ugly. And a great deal of them, I think, it's because of this stuff that I talk about where we romanticize it. I have seen 2 entrepreneurs who could have sold for hundreds of millions of dollars who went out of business because they and their investors were like, no, this is $1 billion, $2 billion, $6 billion one guy company. It's like, yeah, but it's a $200 million company right now. You only took $10 million in investment 4 years ago, and you still own it all. He's literally going to take $130, $140 million out of that deal, and it's a 4x for his investors, and they're like, it's got to be more than a 4x. And it's like, I return the money you gave to me once every year as an investor. If I give you $1 million, you give me $1 million back a year. I think that's a great investment. Maybe I'm not greedy enough, but that sounds amazing. And they don't do it. They don't do a deal, and then they're out of business. And you read about this all the time. The companies that are worth $1 billion valuation. And this is my last thing. Valuation is not value. And the lesson for all the entrepreneurs out there that are dealing with VCs is this. They're the same as you. They're struggling or they're out of business. They're out raising money and they have a product, and that product is you. The reason they don't sign NDAs, the reason they want copies of your presentations is so that when they're raising money from whatever teachers fund, retirement, whatever bullshit, and they say, oh man, we really like quantum computing and freaking there was a company that did video production that could do movies and TV shows and awesome content stuff. They can pull out John and Whurley's and be like, well, these are some examples of the kind of things we've been looking at for our portfolio, even though they told us they're not going to give us any money. So never forget that everybody's got a boss. They're no different than you, right? You are their product. And so, you can change that dynamic in that relationship.
Well, I think with that, we will sign off. I think if there is there, do you have a last short piece of advice for somebody who has an idea, they have no experience, they have experience in their field, they've got an idea to start a company. What is the first thing they should do?
Build the idea. Don't go start a company. Don't go file stuff. Make the thing work. Go do anything. Because here's where somebody like me will get really excited and invest in you. Is if you've done the bare minimal amount of work it takes to take something out of your head and manifest it in the real world, even if it looks like shit and barely works. If you can just say, I had a concept and I can demonstrate to you in the most basic of ways, I can make that concept work in software and hardware, as a widget, as a whatever, I'm super impressed by that. That I love. And then from there, there's a way to build something. But so many people skip over the whole building the idea part. They build a company, they get money, they build marketing, they build a brand, they build all this stuff. And then later they find out the idea may be impossible to build, or they never built the idea, or it's a shitty idea or whatever. Build it first. Like, just stay at your day job, use your credit card, buy whatever you need, build it nights and weekends. There's plenty of outsourced software developers. There's plenty of outsourced software. There's a company we invested in called Patcher, which allows you to build circuit boards with no knowledge and click a button and they'll ship it off to people and have the circuit boards built and shipped to your house. Like, you live in the greatest time to be alive as an entrepreneur. There's no excuse why you can't spend just a little bit of money, probably sub a couple $1,000s for any idea, hardware or software, and prove it out enough to say, I had an idea and it's awesome, but I went this extra step and I built a very rough prototype, and now I would like some money to do that. And I guarantee you investors will respond 1,000,000 times better.
Thanks, Will.
Thanks for having me, man.
Thanks for listening to the Emergent Order podcast. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcasting app. If you're interested in being a guest, shoot us an email at podcast@emergentorder.com. Our producer is Jesse Bennett. Thanks again, and speak to you next time.